The Prophecy Club, a nationwide television program, a nationwide radio program. The Prophecy Club also hosts approximately 40 major city meetings per month. Our mission is to inform Christians of current events that confirm Bible prophecy, expose the evil devices of Satan, warn believers what is coming to America, challenge people to stop sinning and turn to Jesus with all their heart, and to provide a platform for Christian speakers to be heard.
It's a bald-faced lie.
Using their positions of power and authority in our own government.
The greatest oil field in the world is at the southwest end of the Dead Sea. He said, son, you must warn this nation.
And now your host for the Prophecy Club, Stan Johnson.
What a crowd. Welcome to the Prophecy Club, where we study and research Bible prophecy. And before I even get started into this videotape, I want to make something perfectly clear. Our objective here tonight is to beat upon the devil, to expose evil. Our objective is not to beat upon what I think is the greatest nation in the world, nor the greatest government in the world, nor what I hope history proves out to be one of the best presidents of the world. However, I also believe that evil manages to crowbar its way into just about everything. Our families, our businesses, as well as our churches, and don't you know, it has got into our government as well. Now, I want to make that perfectly clear. We're not trying to beat up on or attack the government or elements of the government. What we are trying to do is say that there's some evil out there, and we're trying to expose that evil. Because our Bible says that the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of truth, will lead us into all truth and will show us things to come. That's what we want to know. We just want to know the truth. Amen? If we don't know the truth, then we're all messed up. So your topic tonight is painful answers about 9/11. Your speaker wrote a book called Painful Questions, and in that book it's a lot of questions, a lot of photographs, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. And I asked him to make a videotape called Painful Answers, and I've asked him specifically in this videotape to go ahead and speculate based upon the best evidence we have up to this point what he thinks really happened. Let me also just say, that's what he's doing. He's bringing the evidence that we have up to this point. But just like the JFK assassination, there's folks still writing books on it, still getting speaking fees, talking about JFK. Happened, some 35 years ago, or 40, whatever it was. So, but we're bringing it as we get it. And there will probably be other videotapes talking about 9/11. Anyway, why is this painful answers about 9/11 important? Well, did the World Trade Centers really collapse from melted steel, or was it professionally demolished? Could groups inside of America have planted small explosives at strategic supports to be computer detonated at precisely the right moment to demolish the World Trade Centers? Do photographs and video show that Building 7 collapsed as if it was professionally demolished? Do photographs of both the fire and the rubble also point to a professional demolition? And believe me, there's a whole lot more that he's going to be answering. Who's Eric Hufschmid? Well, I can tell you a lot about him, but he's owned his own business developing CAD and CAM software since 1991. The software shows a person how to draw shapes to cut in metal and other materials. The software then produces a code to control metal cutting machines, lasers, plasma torches, wood cutting machines, etc. And because Eric works in an industry that cuts and welds steel, he understands what it takes to destroy it, cut it, bend it, and so forth. When he saw 9/11, he knew something wasn't right. When he saw those World Trade Centers, Building 7 collapse, he knew something wasn't right. So he began investigating and wrote the book, Painful Questions, of which there's over 100 different color photographs and drawings. So will you help me welcome your speaker tonight, Eric Hufschmid.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit first about how I came to write this book. Since I develop software, I'm not really a journalist. This is not really my field, but I sit in front of a computer all the time. And I don't have a television, so I wasn't watching the news. But on the internet, I see, well, we have collapsed towers, a Pentagon attack, and my initial reaction was, well, what do you expect? The Arabs attacked us. They retaliated. We've been meddling in their affairs for decades. We put them on embargoes. We bombed them. What's so strange about somebody attacking back? So I didn't think anything strange, but I noticed on the internet, there's a lot of people saying things like, we can't believe this. There's something strange here. Don't believe the government. And I'm thinking, what are these conspiracy nuts talking about? At this time, I had never thought anything strange about some of the other attacks we've had. I thought it was a little odd that Tim McVeigh was caught so easily, but I didn't think there was something more than that. I assumed it really was a truck bomb. I wasn't even aware of people like General Parton or any of the other people who had already discussed Oklahoma City. So I was kind of naive. But after a while, after I don't know what it was, something in January, after looking at all these conspiracy nuts, something just got to me and I decided, what are they talking about? I'm going to have to look into this. And so I started searching around the internet for the photos and the news reports. And I started looking closely at the photos of those towers as they came down. And it occurred to me, these towers did not fall down. They didn't crack into two pieces. They look like they've been exploded. They look like somebody put explosives in them and blew them up. And so I put some documents together in January of 2002, posted them on the internet saying, it looks like these towers were blown up. And I started contacting people. I sent email messages to some university professors in physics and engineering. I sent email to people I thought might have some technical background into this and said, look into this. Look at these photos. Look at this reports. Something that doesn't look right here. But nobody paid any attention to anything I said. And even if I tried to talk to my own family members, how do you talk to them in words? How can you say to them, something's wrong with this attack? It was impossible. And so I decided, what I need is something I can show them, like a book. I can then take a book like this and say, well, look at this photo. How do you explain this rubble? How do you explain these jets of dust coming out of here? Without something to hold in your hand like this, without good quality photos, it was very difficult to talk even to your own family members. So that's why I ended up creating this book. And I figured nobody else was going to do it. I didn't see anybody else interested at all, so I figured, well, I'll do it. It's not really my job, not my line of work, but I'll do it since nobody else is. So that's how I got into it. And one of the typical objections that I run into, of course, is that, well, why would our government do such a thing? This is one of the problems you're going to run into if you ever try to discuss this issue, even with your own friends and family members. Let's assume I can prove 100% that this attack was completely a scam. Let's assume I can even name the names of the people. What good does it do if none of us can even talk about it with our own family members, if everybody dismisses us as conspiracy nuts? We have to be able to talk about it. It doesn't do us any good to keep it to ourselves. Imagine if I had the answers to life in this book, and then you try to tell somebody about it, and they laugh at you and think, oh, you're a nut. Why should we listen to you? So what I find is this typical objection. Most people refuse to even consider what I'm saying in this book because they say, our government would never allow such an attack. Therefore, why should I even consider you? Why should I even take what you say seriously? If we can't get past this attack, nobody will even listen. It's sort of like, if you want to visualize this, picture people as a shell around them. They are all biased in America towards our own nation, towards our own government. And in order to get them to even consider that this attack could be a scam, you've got to crack that shell open and show them it is possible that this could happen. And one way of doing that is to show them that it's not our government that did the attack. Our government consists of perhaps tens of millions of people. My brother's wife works for the county government of our city. She's not involved in this. So when you tell somebody our government was involved, that right there is creating a problem because it's not our government. It would be a small group of criminals within the government and possibly within business. And now if there was a few thousand government officials involved in this attack, that is such a small amount, you wouldn't even notice them. They'd be invisible. And let's take a look at some of the background into the things people were saying years before that would lead up to such an attack. The editor of U.S. News and World Report in 1999 was pointing out in an editorial that there's $4 trillion worth of gas and oil in the Caspian Sea area. And he's warning us, Central Asian resources may revert back to the control of Russia. This would be a nightmare situation. We had all better wake up to the dangers. Now, consider this. This is Caspian Sea oil. This is not our oil. What are we supposed to do about that? He's saying it may revert to the control of Russia. Well, it's more theirs than ours. What's the big deal? And he's saying we should wake up to these dangers. This is what I would call paranoia. And then you have to ask, if he's paranoid that the Russians may get this oil, what happens if we don't wake up? Would he be willing to assist something to wake us up? And is he the only one who has this paranoia? Could there be other people also worried that we may never wake up? And would they also be willing to help us wake up with a fake terrorist attack, perhaps? Then look at some oil company executives. This is even earlier in time, 1998, February. This vice president of Unocal Corporation testified to the U.S. Congress that the oil companies cannot begin construction of a pipeline until an internationally recognized Afghanistan government is in place. Now, what do the oil companies expect the U.S. government to do about this? This is equivalent to Budweiser complaining to the government, we can't sell beer in Saudi Arabia until a new government is in place because they won't allow alcohol sales. Well, what does that have to do with us? What is our government supposed to do to help Budweiser sell beer? This is a sign that these oil companies at least consider the possibility that our government is going to do something to change the Afghanistan government. This is a sign of how they look at our government, and they're trying to do it. Now, if we look at what the military did in Afghanistan, we were told that after the attack, our military went into Afghanistan to search for Osama and his training camps. Supposedly, the Taliban was allowing these training camps, and we had to go in there, find them, and destroy them. So our military is in there throwing billions of dollars worth of bombs all over the place, attacking the Taliban, helping the Northern Alliance. And after a while of this, there was an international press conference, and General Tommy Franks, who was in control of the American military, was asked, well, where's Osama? Have you gotten any closer to finding this guy? And his response was, that's not what militaries do. Well, if he was not there to search for Osama, what was he there for? We get an idea when we consider that after the Taliban was defeated and the Northern Alliance said, okay, you can send a pipeline through. That's the end of that. We're done. Osama's not in the news anymore. We're not looking for him anymore. We're not searching for training camps anymore. We're on to Iraq. Now, is this a coincidence? Add this all up. We have paranoia of getting access to that oil. We go in there, bomb the Taliban. As soon as that oil pipeline's done, we're done with it. Now, you may think oil companies couldn't possibly be so corrupt as to try to start a war simply for profit. They wouldn't be so corrupt as to kill people, just possibly ruin America simply for some profit. Let's take a look at history. Look at American history. It doesn't even matter which country, but let's just take our own. There's crime after crime, monopoly attempt after monopoly attempt, over and over, and the laws don't stop it. We've had law after law. Unions have developed in an attempt to stop some of the corruption. Then we have problems with union corruption. It's like no matter what organization develops, once it gets real large, you have the potential that it could get corrupted. And if you want an example of corporate conspiracies and how people will do things that actually destroy this country, take a look at the destruction of the electric train system. In the 1930s and 1940s, Firestone, Standard Oil, and General Motors conspired to destroy the electric train system because they wanted to sell more cars. They formed a company, National City Lines, and this company was going to use General Motors buses, Firestone tires, and Standard Oil fuel. By 1949, they were actually convicted of conspiracy. This is not a conspiracy theory. Our government convicted them of it. But by this time they were convicted, they had already destroyed over 100 electric trains in 45 cities. Now you may wonder, what difference does it make? It's a long time ago. Who needs those old electric trains anyway? Well, we could have had trains like this. This is what Europe has right now. They've had this for years. These things look like they're out of a science fiction movie. While our trains have been destroyed, they in other countries have been improving theirs, and this is what they've been running for the past few years. Trains that cruise at 185 miles an hour, hitting top speeds beyond that. Trains that can be on time. Meanwhile, what do we have? We can't get anywhere in most cities by train. We have to drive everywhere. And if you want an idea of how bad our trains are, compare them to some of the foreigners. In 1964, that was when Japan came out with their 130-mile-per-hour train. That Tokyo-Osaka line has never been more than 42 seconds off schedule. Europe's trains are now cruising since 2000. They've been cruising at 185 miles an hour. And in 2003, China has been experimenting with an 18-mile track of 260-mile-per-hour magnetic train. This train doesn't have wheels. It's on a magnetic track. It's a little expensive now. It's experimental. But think about this. We're told China is this poor nation. People are starving to death. They have nothing. It's a bad communist nation. They have trains way beyond anything we're capable of making here. Now, all around the world, people are improving their trains. Here in America, they deteriorate. Why? Because of a corporate conspiracy. Because Americans have done something to, in their mind, help themselves, but it's destroying America, and they don't care. Not only that, but it's been over 50 years, so you may say, well, those conspiracies are over with. Well, look at your trains today. We still have the same crummy trains, so we have a problem here. It was 50 years ago that they started to destroy these trains, or I should say 50 years ago that they were caught destroying the trains, and we still haven't recovered. We still don't have trains like the rest of the world. What does this tell you? It tells you either the conspiracies are still going on, or our government simply doesn't care to fix the problem, or the American people have been so discouraged and so apathetic that they're not putting pressure on anybody to fix the problem. Whatever it is, it's a bad sign that these problems are not being fixed. This, in turn, could make it easier for a rogue group to develop and nobody do anything about it. We're not doing anything about the trains. Maybe we're not doing anything about these other criminal groups within our government. Maybe there's other organized crime activity we're not doing anything about. You have to ask yourself, if we're not going to fix our own train systems, what else are we not fixing? Is this the only thing? Now, a lot of people who don't know much about some of the previous scams, there's a lot of people that grew up, like myself, believing Oswald killed Kennedy and Tim McVeigh blew up the Oklahoma City building by himself. And they'll say, well, okay, so corporations may be willing to commit scams and all that, but nothing like 9/11 has ever happened before. Why should we believe that's a scam? Well, it has happened before. After I wrote my book, I discovered, people told me, about General Parton, and he has proven that the Oklahoma City bombing was a big scam. He shows that there was a truck parked by a building, it exploded, but his calculations, he did some calculations on this. He was an expert in explosives for the military. And he calculated the pressure for that bomb, and he said there is no possible way that that bomb could possibly have destroyed that building. He put together a graph. Let me show that first. He put this graph together. He showed the little rectangles are the concrete structures that hold the tower up, this building up. They're concrete with steel reinforcing rods. The red rectangles are the ones that were demolished. What he shows is that the pressure from this bomb, the bomb explodes in a spherical manner, and as it expands, the gas drops in pressure. So by the time it hits the building, it's at a much lower pressure than it was at the truck. And the problem he finds is that by the time it reaches these columns, it doesn't have the pressure to shatter that concrete. And that's what happened to this building. The concrete was shattered, the reinforcing rods were laid bare. One of them at the back end was completely shattered, and the pressure was only 27 pounds per square inch. You have more air pressure in your tires. There is no way 27 pounds per square inch is going to take concrete off steel reinforcing rods. His conclusion was that somebody put demolition explosives in this building. The truck bomb was simply to grab your attention, to make you think, oh, well, that was what did it. Meanwhile, explosives were being detonated inside the building while people were in there. This is exactly what happened. Explosives were blown up while people were there, and then there was an investigation that was superficial. And the rubble from the Trade Center, the Oklahoma City bombing, was immediately removed and buried so nobody could investigate it. Some of the same people involved in the investigation of the Oklahoma City bombing were involved in the investigation of the World Trade Center. You'll see some of those same names, such as Gene Corley and Controlled Demolition Incorporated. So what does this show you? It shows you that Oklahoma City and 9/11, they're basically the same. 9/11 was the sequel. If you've ever watched Hollywood movies, you'll notice that whenever they find a successful movie, they make a few changes to it and release it. They have a new movie, but it's basically the same one with a few changes. That's what 9/11 was. Instead of Tim McVeigh being taken advantage of, Tim McVeigh was probably fooled. The government probably noticed, here's an angry guy. He's angry with what happened at Waco. Let's take advantage of him. Let's talk to him and say, hey, why don't we get back at the government? Tim McVeigh may not have ever known that there were demolition explosives in that building. For all we know, he may have thought all he was going to do was drive this truck up. The truck would explode in front of the building, creating a message like, you better not do anything. He may not have even realized that those buildings were going to be shattered. But the truck bomb was simply to grab the attention of the public and make us think that Tim McVeigh did it. Now, 9/11 appears to be the exact same plot, except that they used Mohammed Atta. They probably found this guy. He was angry with America, and they said to him, hey, why don't you do this or that? We'll have this little attack. And who knows what they told him, but he may have been thinking they were going to do something or other to get back at America. This time, they used airplanes instead of trucks, though. This was a bigger scam. But it's the same basic thing. You use something to grab everybody's attention. There's a big fire. The airplanes created large fireballs. It attracted everybody's attention. But what was really going on was that there were demolition charges inside the buildings, and that's what brought them down. Now, if you think they might have stopped with 9/11, you have to ask yourself, if they got away with Oklahoma City, they got away with 9/11, why would they stop? Well, take a look now at Bali, Indonesia. On October 12, 2002, about a year later, there's somebody named Joe Vialis. He's either British or Australian. I think he's in Australia right now. He posted on the internet within days that there's something wrong with this bomb in Bali, Indonesia. He put these rare photos up. There's hardly any photos about this. If you look back at October 12th, try to find pictures of this bomb that went off, or any kind of serious news reports. The BBC will tell you that the attack, this particular car bomb, destroyed buildings within a 3,000-foot radius. They didn't completely demolish them all, but it was causing damage within 3,000-foot diameter. Here's a photo of just some of the cars that had been burned out. It looks like some incredibly high-pressure gas has just burned everything non-metallic off these cars. Not only did it burn cars, but it put a crater the size of a swimming pool in the street. The police have right now put this tape around it, and it's filled up with water so you can't see how deep it is, but there's a crater in the road. Here the crater is, it's a little easier to see. Some of the water has been taken out. They're having some sort of I guess you'd call it a funeral ceremony around it. This has got to be considered the world's largest, most powerful car bomb. There have been car bombs in Northern Ireland. There have been car bombs in other countries. There has never been a car bomb, as far as anyone knows, that has dug a crater, and especially not a crater this size, nor has there been a car bomb that has reached in a 3,000-foot diameter circle. And that's not all this bomb did. This bomb was stripping concrete off of reinforcing rods. This is a picture of some of the reinforcing rods that were hanging in the air. They were at a building about 50 feet away from this bomb. The concrete was just blasted off of it. So we have a bomb now. It dug a crater the size of a swimming pool. It stripped concrete off of reinforcing rods, and it was damaging buildings within 3,000-foot diameter. There has never been a car bomb that has done that. Talk to anybody who's had any sort of bomb experience, the police departments, the FBI. There's a lot of bomb squads in this country. And there are also a lot of military people that have had experience and training with bombs. There is no chemical bomb that you can put into a car that will do this. When miners are mining coal or rock, what they do in order to dig into the rock is they put a hole first. They'll drill a hole, put explosives into it, pack in some more dirt into the back end of that hole, and then they detonate the explosives. They have to be under the ground, in the rock. They've got to be somehow underneath in order to blast a hole. You don't lay dynamite on top of rock and expect it to blast the rock up for you. You don't mine coal by laying dynamite on top of the coal. You've got to get it in there, underneath it, and then it puts it up. That means this bomb had to have been under the ground, not in a car. But if it's underground, like it dropped into a sewer, then how did it have the power to reach 3,000 feet away? How did it have the power to dig the crater and rip this concrete off the steel reinforcing rods? As Joe Vialis points out, there's only one bomb that has this power. It's what we call a suitcase nuke. By putting it underground, by dropping it into a sewer or something, it gets muffled. Most of its power is spent digging that crater. By the time that blast is out of the ground, it's still powerful. It's still beyond any car bomb, but at least it's not obviously a nuclear bomb at that point. So what this is giving you telling you is that these people are not stopping with with the Oklahoma City bomb. They're not stopping with the 9/11 attack. They keep going, and now they're using nuclear bombs. Now, putting it in this primitive island, this is why they can get away with it. They couldn't have put this into Boston or Los Angeles because there'd be too many people with Geiger counters. There'd be too many physicists, too many people with cameras. But by putting it over here at this tourist island, it's right next to the water. The rain is constantly coming down to wash away radiation right into the ocean. And there's not that many people around with experience with nuclear bombs or weapons. So it's a good spot to put it. It's a good spot when it's primitive like that. Nobody would notice. Now let's look at the September 11th attack. Take a look at the crash of Flight 77 at the Pentagon. This was something that apparently only the French noticed at first. As far as I know, no American even had any realization that there was something wrong with this attack. But there were some people in France that were studying the photos and news reports, and by March of 2002, news had reached the American internet sites that these people were complaining there is no evidence that Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. There was only a lot of suspicious behavior, coincidences, and secrecy. And it was at the beginning of March, we on the internet who were talking about it were saying, okay, wow, this is really interesting news here. The French are not finding anything in the photos. So we all start looking in the photos and we start agreeing with them. So the news is just spreading wildly all over America. A few days after that news had reached America, the military released 5 images from a security camera in front of the Pentagon. This is the first of the 5 images. Now what these images do, if you recall, on September 11th, you saw the airplanes crashing into those towers perhaps 1 million times. They just repeated them constantly. Did you ever see Flight 77 hit the Pentagon? The reason is they told you there isn't any photos or video of that plane hitting the Pentagon. Well, in March 2002, what do? They release images from a camera that has Flight 77. What does this do? It proves they lied to you. It proves the military lied. They said they had no photos, and then they say, okay, well, we actually have security cameras, and they did film it. Well, why didn't they tell us this before? And also, you have to ask yourself, if this shows Flight 77, why don't they just give us the whole thing and let us see it? Why are they hiding it and saying, well, we have it, but you can't see it. We have it, but you can only see these 5 images. You also have to ask yourself, if they lied about this, what else have they lied about? When you catch somebody lying to you about something, don't you start to wonder, if they lied to me about that, maybe they lied about something else? So when somebody tells you, our military would never do anything wrong, you got proof right here. This is proof they lied to you. But this is proof you cannot trust them. Not only that, but take a look close at these images. This, what I circled in red, is what they're claiming to be Flight 77. See that white trail? It looks like white smoke coming out the back end of Flight 77. Now, if you've ever been to an airport, when have you ever seen white smoke coming out the back end of a commercial turbojet? This looks like the exhaust of a missile. Now, if this video truly shows Flight 77, why wouldn't they just say, here it is, watch the whole thing for yourself? Why give us this one image? Well, they give us another image after this. This one is supposed to be the plane hitting the building, and now all the jet fuel is burning. Does that look like jet fuel to you? If you've ever seen jet fuel burn, gasoline, from car accidents or airplane accidents, it's always the same. Orangish flames, darkish, full of soot. It's filthy. This, by comparison, is enormous. It's taller than the Pentagon. The Pentagon is 72 feet tall at the very edge and 77 feet at the tips of the roofs. This thing's beyond the roof. This thing has got to be about 100 feet tall. It looks very bright, almost white, and there's almost no soot. This does not look like jet fuel or gasoline. This looks like an explosive. If this video truly shows that this is Flight 77, why don't they prove their innocence? Furthermore, take a look at the corners. In the lower left corners of these video frames are the times and dates that these frames were taken, and that they're wrong. The day is wrong. The time is perhaps wrong, but we know the day is wrong. Now, why would they put a false date in there? It just so happens that one of the software projects I worked on in the 1980s was to put time code onto one of the military installations. I was recording time code onto their video so that they could synchronize a lot of video cameras. And I know that they use iRig time code all over the military bases to synchronize events, to synchronize clocks, to identify events. It's almost certain that they have iRig time code on those Pentagon security cameras, which means they know precisely when these frames of video were taken. So why would they put in a fake time like this? Well, there's a good reason why they would put a fake time in. They're claiming, duh, we don't know. They're acting stupid. But there's a good reason why they would want a fake time if this whole attack is a scam. The reason is that there's a big conflict about when did this thing hit and what hit, how many things hit. There are some witnesses saying they heard 2 explosions. Some say they heard something like a missile. Some say they heard something like a little corporate jet. There's no real agreement between the witnesses as to what happened and when. If they had truly identified the time these video frames were taken, somebody else may say, wait a minute, that's not when I heard that noise. And somebody else may say, yeah, and that's not when I saw that thing fly by. But by putting a false time in here, nobody can say, hey, that time doesn't correlate to what I remember. So that would explain why they have the false time. But the military is playing stupid. They're saying, we don't know. Well, if they don't know why the time is wrong, this again, you have to ask yourself, if they're that stupid, what are they in control of our military for? How can you allow that? How can you allow stupidity to be used as an excuse? Now look at the pictures taken by some of the witnesses. This was taken by a man named Steve Riskus. He was driving by. As you can see in front of the Pentagon, there's a highway running in front of it. The cars are all stopped right here. He was driving along this highway. He says he saw this thing fly by his windshield. All the cars end up stopping. He had a digital camera in his car, so he got out and took some pictures. Now the picture in this photo is in front of the helicopter landing pad. That's what that big concrete rectangle is. And there's fires all over it. This is not the area that collapsed later on. There's no airplane parts here. There's no hole from any airplane. He is focusing on the helicopter pad because there's a lot of fires there. And it's also interesting that some other witnesses are claiming they saw something hit the helicopter pad. So, but this is not where the military says the plane hit. What hit here? Where did these fires come from? This is why I say the time code, they may have put in a false time because there's a big discrepancy over what happened and when. Something must have gone on by this helicopter pad. Here's the area that collapsed. It's in the center, in the center portion of this photograph is the part that collapsed, but this is before it collapsed. You can see firemen are spraying foam all over the place, but there's no hole for the building. There's no hole from the airplane, I should say. There's a little dent. You can see a couple flames, but there's no sign of any airplane, nor is there anything on the grass in front of the building. Now, the French, when they saw these photos and they put it on their website, they're making sarcastic jokes about this. I can't remember it word for word. It's something like the Penta 2000 lawn. You can put jet fuel on it. You can crash airplanes into it. And you can still play golf. To them, it's a sarcastic joke. But think about what this means to us. There's other nations now making sarcastic jokes about this entire attack. Originally, on September 11th, look at what happened. On September 11th, everybody was feeling sorry for us, thinking, oh, the Americans were attacked by Osama. By March, the French were making sarcastic jokes, at least some of the French, about the Penta 2000 law and all the rest of this. Our support is disappearing around the world. And the Pentagon, meanwhile, is claiming they have video that shows Flight 77, but we can't see it, nobody else can see it. They won't prove their innocence. We have only these suspicious photos to look at, and these photos are simply supporting the French accusation that that plane never even hit. This is where the area that crashed, the collapsed area, is in that red rectangle. There is no sign of anything, any airplane hitting that. There's a few windows broken, but the airplane, a 757, which is what this was taller than one floor of that building. The engines alone were 9 feet in diameter. Now, Pentagon is a 5-story building. The Flight 77 would have crashed through at least 2 of those floors. It was taller than one floor. You can't find any sign of it here or on the lawn. Well, let's take a look inside the building. You might think, well, maybe it just somehow went right through. We just can't see it. It just bored a hole in there, and there's the whole plane, and all the passengers are inside. Well, they sent a dog in there to look around for those people. And look, it doesn't matter which photo of the dog you look at. There's several photos of him. He's all got this blank look on his face. Duh, what am I here for? He doesn't know. He has no idea what he's looking for. There's no sign of any passengers anywhere in this building. Now, if a dog can't find passengers, doesn't that tell you there aren't any? I mean, what are the chances that this plane could hit this building? 64 people are in there, and the dog can't even find a piece of them? 64 people, let's say they average 100 pounds apiece. That's 6,400 pounds of meat. Picture 6,400 pounds scattered around, and a dog can't find even a piece of it. Now, you may wonder, okay, well, maybe there's something suspicious about that attack. But I still can't believe our government was involved. Well, remember, it's not our government. It's a few people within them and a few people within business. And if you want an idea of how few, it doesn't take very many. Take a look at this. A newspaper in New Hampshire reported that the controller who handled Egypt Air's Flight 990 also watched over both planes that hit the World Trade Center towers. Is this a coincidence? One controller, one air traffic controller, 3 suspicious crashes. It doesn't take the whole FAA to conduct a scam. Here we have one person, 3 suspicious crashes. That Flight 990, if you remember, that was the one that crashed into the Atlantic Ocean, and they're saying, well, we don't know why it crashed. Maybe one of the crew members went into the cockpit when the pilot was gone, and maybe he decided to commit suicide while nobody was there. I mean, what are the chances of that happening? And then when you look at this air traffic controller, you find out this is the same guy that watched over the ones that hit the towers. Something's wrong here. Either that person, that air traffic controller, is deliberately letting this stuff happen because he's in on it, or somebody else is in on it and he's distracting that air traffic controller at the right moments. But it doesn't take the whole FAA to do this. And we don't even investigate this air traffic controller. Now, we have an FBI that's supposed to be like a detective agency. What would you think if you went to a restaurant? Every time one particular cook is there, people die from food poisoning. Wouldn't you say, wait a minute, we should check to see if this guy can even cook properly? Well, here we have an air traffic controller, 3 mysterious crashes. Why doesn't the FBI even look into who this person is? What kind of an FBI do we have here? Another thing that shows you that innocent people can even be drawn into this attack is the Pentagon attack itself. This attack was so stupid, the planning was so bad, that it's a sign that there are innocent people helping out without their realizing it. Because it's not likely that the people who planned this could possibly be this stupid. Take a look at what this plane is supposed to have done. This is a computer simulation done by the French. This is what the official military explanation is. This plane came in a few inches above the grass at 400 miles per hour. Now remember, right in front of this, there's a highway. There's cars along that. There's streetlights. There's also trees over there and buildings farther away. This plane supposedly knocked down streetlights on its way to the Pentagon, cruising right above the cars, then dropped down, after it got over the cars, dropped down to the grass level at 400 miles per hour. Now, if you've ever tried to land an airplane, they land as slow as they can possibly go, and it's still one of the most difficult parts of flying an airplane. This is cruising 400 miles an hour. I'd like to see the Air Force trick pilots, those fancy guys at the air shows, do something like this. I cannot believe this is even possible. Who would plan an attack like this? This is a sign that the people who planned it were not trying to be realistic. It's a sign that some people were deceived into this. They were just setting up a test, for example. Maybe they thought, we'll just simulate an attack just to see how the firemen respond. It's a sign that these people were not even trying to be realistic. This is what we would call sensible, like a kamikaze pilot in World War II. You fly above the ground. You look down, you see the Pentagon, then you dive into it. But that's not what the Pentagon is telling us happened. Now, there's one other thing that may mean more to me than you, because I live under the flight path. When a plane the size of a 757 flies over my neighborhood, you cannot even carry on a conversation. It's a few seconds. It only takes a few seconds, but if you're on the phone or you're trying to talk to someone, you literally have to wait. The noise is deafening. Now, if you can hear Harley-Davidson motorcycles from hundreds of feet away. Compare that to this. These engines are 9 feet in diameter on a Boeing 757. I'm 6 feet tall. Picture this thing. It's 3 feet taller than me. There's 2 of them. If this thing were truly inches above those cars, don't you think the people in the cars would have heard it? Don't you think there'd be reports of people saying, I can't believe the noise I heard? It was deafening. But you look in the newspaper reports, look in all of the TV reports. Do you see one witness saying, the noise, I couldn't believe it, the thing flew right over my car? Do you see one report? There's not one. And furthermore, the noise probably would have startled some people enough that they might have even had an accident. They might have twisted their wheel wondering what's happening. The first few times when I moved into my house and I heard a couple planes coming in, I ran outside thinking the plane's crashing. I'm thinking, where is it? Where is it? And then it just passed over. I did that a couple times before I started realizing that's just the way it sounds. The people in these cars would have probably done the same thing. They would have thought, something's coming at me. Where is it? And there could be an accident. There was no accidents. The cars simply just stopped, got out, started taking pictures. This is a sign that whatever flew over them was very, very quiet. Now let's ask ourselves, how did this plane even get over there? Air traffic controllers monitor planes constantly. Now this Flight 77 got all the way near the border of Ohio, and an air traffic controller in Indianapolis was going to give it a typical course correction, and he contacts the pilot, but the pilot doesn't respond. So he looks around, he says the plane's not even showing up on his radar anymore. He's calling people for help. The plane is gone. The pilot doesn't respond. Somehow, about 45 minutes later or so, the plane pops up on radar at the Pentagon. Now, how did it get all the way from Ohio to the Pentagon without anybody seeing it on the radar? Because this time, they're looking for it now. They're wondering where this thing is. Somehow it got hundreds of miles through American airspace. Nobody sees it. Is our air traffic control system that bad? Is our radar system that bad that these people can't find a plane that size? Furthermore, you have to ask yourself, how did those guys even get to the Pentagon? If you've ever been in a plane, a commercial plane at 30,000 feet, and you looked out the window, let's assume you're trying to get to the Pentagon up there. Which direction do you turn? What were these guys doing? Using a compass and a map? They didn't have the air traffic controllers to give them any guidance. I mean, what are they doing here? What if there's cloud cover down there? How did they find the Pentagon hundreds of miles away? Well, maybe you're thinking that these guys are some special super-duper pilots. They knew their way. Let's take a look at what these pilots were. The FBI originally said the pilot of Flight 77 was an experienced pilot for a Saudi Arabian airline. Then after that guy in Saudi Arabia said, "What? I'm alive over here. What are you putting me on that list of terrorists for?" Well, and then the FBI says, "Well, oops, okay, let's see. Maybe it was this Hani Hanjo or whatever his name is." Now you have to ask yourself, here we got a real problem. The FBI is accusing somebody of being the pilot, and this guy's alive over there. Where'd they get this guy's name? Did somebody give them this name? Is somebody deceiving the FBI? Is there somebody in the FBI feeding them false information? When you ask yourself, how could these scams occur, we got a problem right here. They are naming names that were not correct. Somebody is either giving them false information, or we have some rogue group within the FBI deceiving the other FBI agents. Whatever it is, there's something wrong here with the FBI, and this is what can allow crimes to occur. People can then feed other false information to them. We only know this information was false because that guy complained about it and threatened to sue. What if he had never said anything? What if he said, "Oh, who cares what they say? I'm in Saudi Arabia, I'm alive." If he had never said anything, we would still think he was the pilot. And there may be other false information the FBI has. We still don't know about it, and they don't even know about it. Then there were some more hijackers. After not just that guy, a couple other ones were complaining. Some say 3 others, some say up to total of up to 7. We're not even sure. Where did the FBI get these names? Remember, right after September 11th, it wasn't very long. They said, "Oh, here's the terrorists. Here's their photos. Here's their names." Where did they get these names and so quickly? And then some of them turn out to be alive. This is a sign that either somebody is feeding the information, false information to the FBI, and if that's happening, then you have to wonder how much other false information are they getting? What is going on with our air traffic controllers, our FBI, our military? Something's wrong, and this can allow these sort of scams to occur. So when someone tells you our government wouldn't allow this, you got all this information to show them it could happen, it is happening. Nothing is going on to even correct any of these problems. Now, if you want to know how even innocent people could get dragged into it in the air traffic control system, just imagine you were an air traffic controller. Now, there haven't been too many hijackings, so it's usual every time you go to work, it's a routine thing. You contact a pilot, tell them to make a course correction or two. It's the usual sort of events, nothing to worry about. So let's say on September 11th, that particular morning, you're watching your radar and you see a plane suddenly just veer off course. The pilot no longer responds to you. You complain, "Hey, something's wrong here. This plane's off course." And imagine somebody in there, maybe your supervisor, maybe someone else tells you, "Oh, don't worry about that. They're running an exercise this morning. They're just simulating an airline to see how the firemen respond." Your reaction might be, if you trust that person, your reaction might be, "Oh, all right, I'll ignore it. It's just an exercise." Now consider that there really was such an exercise scheduled that morning. The National Reconnaissance Office, something that's one of these semi-secret agencies in Washington, D.C., had actually scheduled an exercise on the morning of September 11th. A small jet was going to crash into one of the agency's headquarters. So you have to ask yourself now, who gave him this idea? Somebody who perhaps was involved in the September 11th attack may have said, "Well, let's just set it all up by getting an exercise scheduled that morning, and then we can start telling people, hey, on that morning, we're going to run an exercise in which a plane crashes into Washington, D.C., and just ignore any weird events that day." This is setting up the possibility now to deceive a lot of innocent people to letting it happen. Once they schedule this exercise, they can let out all these rumors. hey, on that morning, we're going to run an exercise in which a plane hits the building. So just tell everybody, if you see a plane wandering off towards Washington, D.C., just ignore it. So this is one explanation of how innocent air traffic controllers could be deceived into letting something happen. They would be fooled into thinking it was just an exercise. And then imagine you're an air traffic controller again. And then after you ignored that plane because you thought it was an exercise, imagine someone tells you, hey, that wasn't an exercise, that was a real plane. Those were real people. Wouldn't you be thinking to yourself, what have I done? I'm partly to blame for all those deaths. I shouldn't have done that. How many of you would call a press conference and talk to even the victims' families? Say, I'm so sorry. I thought it was an accident. I'm so sorry. It's my fault. How many of you would admit to that? Most people, if you can remember, especially when you were a child, when you did something wrong, your first reaction is to just keep quiet and hope it just goes away. That's the way most people still are as adults. When you do something wrong, your first reaction is, I better just keep quiet. I don't want to be blamed for this. And you can imagine an air traffic controller, if he was deceived into this, how many of them are going to want to say, hey, I'm the reason that it happened. Come over here. You can all yell at me. I'm the reason. So once we have this exercise set up, and once we've got these air traffic controllers deceived, we now have this possibility that some of them are now going to keep quiet about it rather than tell us what happened. So now they've got innocent people helping the scam. And I don't know how to describe this other than the fear of lynch mobs. This is what keeps a lot of people quiet. Because when something goes wrong, whenever there's something going wrong in America, you'll find people demanding revenge. They want somebody to blame. They're saying always, who is to blame for this? They're not saying, how do we fix this problem? What caused the problem, and how can we make it not occur again? They're not looking for an understanding of the problem. They're looking for somebody to blame, somebody to hate, somebody to get revenge on. And this fear is what's going to cause a lot of people to keep information in secret because they don't want to have to be blamed for the problem. And then once they keep it secret, it's like lying. You know what it's like when you lie, if you've ever done it when you were a kid. It's like stepping into quicksand. Once you start it, how do you get out of it? You got to keep remembering what the lies were, and you got to keep them going. And so some people might even go farther and be tempted to start destroying the information. If any air traffic controller did that, then he'd be accused of a real crime, destruction of evidence. And then he could be exploited by being threatened with blackmail. So you can see that it's possible to take innocent people, deceive them into letting the attack occur, and then they're scared to even talk about it. And they may even destroy evidence to keep it quiet. There was other information that's been suppressed. Why it was suppressed, nobody knows. They're not telling us. But more than a year after the towers collapsed, audio tape of the firefighters' communications from the South Tower was released. Now, these firefighters, I originally thought they were just wandering up in the towers with firefighting gear, but I didn't realize that they all had, or at least a lot of them had, radios with them. And they were talking back and forth to their base station. Some of them made it up in the South Tower to the fire zone. And they were walking around among that fire zone, talking back to the base station, saying, yeah, we're here now. There's a couple fires here. There's a couple fires there. We're going to start putting them out. That transcript, those audio tapes were hidden for more than a year. And why? Because it's evidence that those fires were not intense. But the point I want to make is that it doesn't take that many people to hide this sort of evidence. It only takes like one person in the fire department or maybe one FBI agent to take that tape and maybe slip it aside or put secret on it or somehow hide it. It doesn't take the entire FBI. It doesn't take the entire fire department. It only takes a couple people. Now take a look at the Pentagon. Let's go back to that for a minute. There were employees at the Pentagon who died. Now the plane hit an area of the Pentagon that was almost completely empty because it was being renovated. But there were some people wandering around. There was about 125 people in total that died. The bodies were picked up immediately and sent down south to a morgue in Virginia. Then, after they arrived at this morgue, they were shipped to a morgue in Dover. That's the big morgue. Now, why would they do this double shipping of dead bodies. I mean, who even wants to handle dead bodies at all? Why don't they just ship them straight to Dover? Well, let's take a look. Remember, where were the passengers and crew of Flight 77? There was not even the dogs could find them. There's no sign of them in the photographs. However, the people at Dover claim to have identified them with DNA and dental records and other evidence. So the people in Dover are claiming they have the bodies of the passengers and crew of Flight 77. But the dogs couldn't find them at the Pentagon, and neither do the photographs show them. So how did they get to Dover? We have the problem that either they never got to Dover and everybody in Dover is lying, or they did get to Dover, and then we have that problem. How did they get there? Now, the chances are, remember I said, it's not our government involved in this. It would be a few people. It's not likely that everybody in Dover is involved in this. So it's a good chance that Dover's telling us the truth. They really do have the bodies. So how do we explain it? One way is that Flight 77 landed somewhere near where it disappeared. There's a lot of abandoned military bases. They're not truly abandoned. They're just not active any longer. Perhaps Flight 77 landed at one of those Air Force bases, and the people were then taken off, killed, maybe put in a room with a bomb. Their bodies are blown up, so it looks like they were in an airplane crash. And then those bodies were shipped to the morgue in Dover. At the same time, the employees at the Pentagon were being shipped to Dover. So the people at Dover, all they see is bodies coming in. They don't know from where. But they can then look through them all, identify them, and say, yeah, here's the ones from the Pentagon, here's the ones from Flight 77. Now, when I first heard of a theory like this, there's something on the internet called the bumble planes theory, and my first thought was, people don't do these sort of things. This is too gruesome. This is like turns your stomach. This bumble plane theory it was a little bit different. It was thinking that all 4 planes had landed and that all of the people were then taken off and put onto Flight 93. And my reaction was, oh, come on, people don't behave like that. I even sent an email to the guy saying, people don't do that. And he's telling me, yes, people do that. So you have to picture this now. If you want to know why people resist anything any of us say, here I am. I got documents on the internet saying the World Trade Centers were blown up with explosives. And yet I'm telling people, I can't believe that these planes landed and that people were taken off and killed. That's just too ridiculous. That's what I'm saying. And yet here I am saying the towers were blown up. Now, people are telling me they can't believe the towers were blown up. So you can see the resistance. We all have this resistance. We can't believe people do this. I have that problem. Other people have that problem. We all have this problem. This is one of the reasons these scams they get away with these scams. But what you have to realize, there are people out there doing things we can't believe, but they're doing them, so we have to believe it. There are some people, I don't know how you describe them except as empty shells. They look like people, but it's as if something's missing from them. Jeffrey Dahmer, David Berkowitz, Richard Ramirez are just a couple examples. How do you explain the way those guys behave? Now, Dahmer, a lot of people think of him as a cannibal. I don't even think that's the strangest thing about it. The strangest thing I find is that he was leaving some of the rotten bodies in his apartment to stink. Now, if you've all been in people's homes, who leaves anything rotten in their house? Some people don't even like to cook fish in their house because of the stench. This guy has rotten bodies. Now, do you remember the story of the teenage boy ran away from Jeffrey Dahmer, went up to the policeman, and the policeman, after he's yelling, please save me, the policeman gives him back to Dahmer, and your first reaction is, what an idiot that policeman must have been. Picture yourself as a policeman. This teenage boy comes up to you. Oh, this guy, he's got bodies in his apartment, they're rotting, he's got heads in the refrigerator, he wants to eat me. And then Dahmer comes up, oh, that kid's got mental problems, I'll take him. My reaction, if I had been a cop, was, you're not kidding, that guy's got mental problems. You should have heard what he said about you. And I said, here, take him back. Boy, that kid does have problems. I would have said, those policemen may have been just as shocked as I would have been. But you have to realize there are people doing things that really are beyond explanation. These people never seem to be happy. They never seem to be capable of forming human relationships. Something is wrong with them. The problem we all seem to suffer from, if you want to call it a problem, is that we assume everybody is like us. If we're honest, we tend to assume other people are honest. It takes years as we grow up to realize people cannot all be trusted. They are not all like us. And I think one of the reasons these scams can be gotten away with is that if they do things that are just totally outrageous, people just find them so difficult to believe that they simply don't believe them. And in fact, it's entirely possible that this Pentagon attack was done in such a way, such a bizarre way, that when information about it came out, people would just dismiss it. It's possible that they had that flight land and had the people killed and deliberately did bizarre things simply so that if when you heard about it, you'd say, oh, people don't do that, and you'd dismiss it. It's possible that these people that have done these scams have figured out that if you make it weird enough, people won't even believe you. Now, why would they hide that audio tape? Remember that audio tape I told you they suppressed? Of the firefighters. The firefighters were walking around on the South Tower. Well, that audio tape proves that these fires were small. Our government tells us that the fire was so intense that it destroyed these towers. Yet the firemen were walking around among the fire. The fires were just scattered on a few floors. They're walking up there. These fires were so small they could have toasted marshmallows on there. Look at this photo, for example. On the left side of this photo is where the plane hit, and that's where all the fires are. The other side, there's no flames at all. The fire never spread from one side of the floor to the other. Now, to understand the significance of that, picture this room. There's a fire on one side. Imagine it burns and burns, but it never makes it to the other side of this building. What does that tell you? It tells you that fire is not very big. That tells you that the air temperature in here never even got above the point where it's going to catch paper on fire. Or if this was an office building, any of the office equipment, the plastic and the computer monitors. This is a sign that fire was not big. It couldn't even continue spreading throughout the cubicles or the burning of the carpeting. And then there's firemen walking around on it. That's even more proof that these fires were not very intense. These firemen are all wrapped up in their heavy firefighting gear. So the temperature on that floor couldn't have been more than, what, 120 degrees Fahrenheit? So this is why they would want to hide that audio tape. See, the government is telling us these fires were so intense, it destroyed a steel building. And then we have firefighters walking around in this. So the firefighters are proving the government is wrong. This is why somebody wanted to hide that tape. This is what a real fire looks like, just so you know by comparison. Flames have busted all of the windows. In a real fire, the heat in the air temperature in the building gets so hot that when it touches the windows, it creates thermal expansion. Windows are not like Pyrex, where you can put them in an oven and they can withstand the uneven heat. Windows, when you heat them up unevenly, will shatter. And look at a real fire. They're all shattered here in this building. This is Building 5 of the World Trade Center. Fires are everywhere. Flames are all over the place. The fires spread from one side to the other. All the windows have shattered. There's smoke pouring out. Firemen are not going to be able to walk around on these floors. This is a real fire, and yet this building did not crumble into pieces. Meanwhile, we have the South Tower fire, where the fires are smaller, firemen are walking around, and that building crumbled. Now, what sort of groups of government agencies might be involved in this? Take a look at the CIA. That agency has shown signs that there is something within it for decades. Now, the LSD experiments they've been conducting, that's old news. I won't even talk about that. But February 2002, there were news reports. Now, a lot of you probably didn't even notice the significance of this, but there was a man in Afghanistan who was killed when a Predator drone fired a missile at him. The news report said it was a CIA Predator drone. They had fired a missile at what they said was a terrorist. And of course, it turned out to be just an innocent man. But the significance of this is that the CIA has Predator drones that fire missiles. This is a Predator. They look backwards because the engine's in the rear, but what it is, it's a drone. There's no pilot here. It's controlled by computers. Now, the Air Force has these planes, but they use them for surveillance, not for offensive weapons. So what this tells us is that the CIA has taken some of these planes, modified them so that they can carry and fire missiles. Now you have to ask yourself, is the CIA allowed to do this? Does the Constitution give the CIA the authority to develop their own advanced military weapons like this? Does our Constitution allow any government agency to develop military weapons and to use them to kill people? The CIA didn't ask anybody to kill that person. They just did it. And then, after they say, oops, it's the wrong guy, they don't even say they're sorry. They don't even do anything, nor does anybody else. At least when the police accidentally kill somebody, they have an investigation to see if that policeman's competent. The CIA, they kill people by accident. Nobody even cares. Now you have to then ask yourself, who in the CIA developed this? And if it's okay for the CIA to protect us with a military force, what if the post office were to do this? The post office has to deal with possible letter bombs or anthrax. What if the post office decides, well, they're going to also develop military weapons, and what if they accidentally kill somebody because they think he's a terrorist? I mean, when do we say this is out of control here? Or what if the next president creates another of these secret agencies like the CIA, and they also start developing their own weapons? When do we stop this? When do we say there's something wrong with our government here? And then you have to ask yourself, was the CIA following orders to develop and use these military weapons? And if so, who gave them the orders? And why are they following such ridiculous orders? Or are they giving the orders? Who's following who here? Does the CIA follow Bush, or does Bush follow the CIA? And what if the post office developed and used weapons because some mystery person told them? Wouldn't you want to know who this person is and what's going on? Our government doesn't even discuss these issues, and the media doesn't discuss it, but it's a sign that something is wrong with our government and our CIA. And it's the secrecy of the CIA that allows this sort of thing to occur. The CIA doesn't even let us know how many people work for them. They don't let us know their operating budget. And this sort of secrecy allows these criminal groups to form and develop and exist within them. For example, the group that developed that Predator drone and the missile. Do you know who that group is in the CIA? Do you know how many employees they have that did that? Do you know what their budget is? Nobody knows. Nobody even knows if they're American citizens. Nobody knows anything about them. Furthermore, was that the only weapon they developed? We only know they developed it after they used it. They didn't tell us that beforehand. It was only when they used it. Do they have other weapons that they've already developed? Are they developing some more right now? For all we know, the anthrax came from that same group of people. For all we know, that bomb in Bali came from that same group of people. Until we investigate, how are we going to know? But we don't investigate. The CIA could have a group within it. They don't know how many employees they have, I bet. They won't tell us. How do they know they know? How do we know they know? I mean, they don't even know. They don't let us know their operating budget. How many of them know their operating budget? Now look at any large corporation. They all break themselves down into departments within departments and departments. And often you'll find the departments of one company don't even know the departments within their company, even if they're on the same floor in the same building. Different departments tend to keep to themselves for a variety of reasons. One, human nature. We tend to keep our own to ourselves and let each supervisor deal with his own problems, but also for financial reasons. And if these different departments are in different cities, it's almost certain that the employees will be oblivious to one another. Now, the CIA is probably broken up into departments also. And the secrecy of the CIA will exasperate this problem because the departments may be even more oblivious to each other than in a conventional business. There may be departments of the CIA in different cities that are completely oblivious to one another. This makes it even easier for a rogue group to develop and exist, because they could be there developing weapons and nobody else even knows they're there. It could be that the majority of CIA people are decent people, honest people, and it's only this one small rogue group developing these weapons and doing all the rest of this, but no one even knows they exist. What's the purpose of the CIA anyway? They claim to be what they call an intelligence agency. They claim to be like a news organization where they gather information for our government. But their development of military weapons is proof that there is at least one group within them that has gone beyond gathering information and is behaving as a military force. When I say to you, Or you say to one of your friends that the government is out of control. This is proof. When they fired that missile, it's proof. There is something wrong here. The CIA just proved they have some sort of military force within them. And they're operating in secrecy, developing their weapons in secret. They are beyond what they were designed for. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about this. They proved it when they let that missile go off, just like the military proved they were lying when they released that video. American attitudes towards the CIA are what also allow these rogue groups to exist. And if you want a good example, compare our attitudes towards the CIA with our attitudes towards doctors. When a doctor makes a mistake, people sue. They demand retaliation. They want to hurt the doctor. Yet how many doctors are trying to hurt people? Doctors just simply make mistakes once in a while. A lot of them have to work long hours. I worked as a cashier for just brief periods, and I couldn't even give change properly without making mistakes once in a while. How can a doctor be flawless? Yet when a doctor makes a mistake, people are threatening him with lawsuits. They're demanding retaliation. To compare that to the military or the CIA. When they make mistakes, who says anything? If you complain about them, you're considered anti-American. The CIA has already violated what I would say all sorts of laws with that Predator drone, but you're anti-American to complain. The military has lied to us by releasing that video, yet to complain is anti-American. Take a look at some of the CIA mistakes. This is just a few of them. They helped Saddam Hussein get control of Iraq. They helped Gaddafi get control of Libya. They helped Osama fight the Northern Alliance. They helped Noriega in Panama. I mean, these people, if a doctor made mistakes like this, would they be allowed to just get away with it? The CIA makes these mistakes so often they have a word for it, blowbacks. For example, when they decided later that Gaddafi was no longer a good leader, they start torturing the Libyan people with trade embargoes. And when they decided Saddam Hussein was no longer their good leader, they start torturing Iraq with bombings and embargoes. When they decided Osama was no longer their friend, they'd start bombing Afghanistan and helping the Northern Alliance. I mean, these are signs that this agency I wouldn't call them an intelligence agency at all. They're rather stupid, but nobody complains. If you complain about them, you're anti-American. The FBI, by comparison to the CIA, is much better behaved, but compared to your local police force, they're either somewhat corrupt or somewhat incompetent. We know they have about 27,000 employees. A rogue group would have a much more difficult time existing within them. They're much more open and honest. But there is still something wrong with the FBI, and I'll go over quickly a few of their problems. You've probably heard about the flight instructor in Minneapolis, Minnesota, called to complain about that Zacharias. He was training to be a pilot, and they were complaining. There's something wrong with this guy. He's something suspicious. But of course, the FBI did nothing about it. In Arizona, an FBI agent complained to his officials that there's some suspicious men taking flight lessons. The FBI ignored him. Now, is this ignoring of these people incompetence? Is it corruption, or is somebody deceiving them? Remember, they got false names about the terrorists, which is a sign that somebody could be feeding them false information, or somebody within the FBI is manipulating what's going on. That may have been what's happening here. Somebody is either giving them false information or manipulating the FBI. This is a problem, but we don't even look into it. Another example, Colleen Rowley, she's a FBI agent. She wanted to tap this guy's computer, the Zacharias character, but no, her supervisor stopped it. Later, this supervisor was singled out for exceptional performance. Now, this is a guy who stops it. What's going on here? We don't even look into that. Colleen eventually got so annoyed, she wrote a 13-page letter to the director of the FBI, and she's politely accusing him of dishonesty. Now, remember, this is a letter from an agent to the FBI director, so she's going to be very, what you'd call, politically correct. She says, I think you have also not been completely honest about some of the true reasons for the FBI's pre-September 11th failures. Until we come clean. Now, think about what this is. She's being polite. What she's saying is, you're lying, and until we be honest about what happened, that's what she's saying. She's accusing them of this. She's an FBI agent. She's telling the director of the FBI, you're lying, and until you quit lying, So isn't this a sign there's something wrong with the FBI? This is a sign that not everybody in our government is involved in this scam. There's agent after agent trying to help. There's agent after agent saying there's something wrong here, and yet they're ignored. Take a look at this one. Here's Jane Turner. She was investigating a company accused of stealing items at the World Trade Center. During the cleanup of the rubble, she discovered one of the agents had stolen a Tiffany paperweight out of the rubble. Now, since there was tons of debris being hauled away to the dump, my first reaction and yours might be, well, so what? He saw something in the garbage. Why not grab it out? It looked good. Why throw it away? Well, this, as I explain later, is one of the suspicious aspects of the attack, this hauling away of the rubble and throwing it into the dump. That stuff was not supposed to be thrown away. That was evidence. That was supposed to be investigated to find out why the towers collapsed. That stuff was not supposed to be thrown into the garbage. It was supposed to be saved for analysis, and the valuable items you could have returned to their owners. If we allow the FBI agents to get away with stealing items at crime scenes, then we have this problem that what if other people start mimicking them? Somebody else at another crime scene might pick some stuff up, and then he could say, hey, it can't be illegal, the FBI agents are doing it. Now consider the space shuttle. When that blew up, pieces were flying all over the place. On February 4th, 2 people were arrested for picking up the space shuttle debris, and they were facing 10 years in prison and this large fine. Compare that to when Jane Turner complained about an FBI agent taking a paperweight. He gets ignored. We get threatened with jail and fined, and this is an example of what will happen if you let the FBI agents get away with this. They have to follow the same laws we do, or we're going to create a very bad environment. Jane Turner eventually contacted a couple senators for help. These 2 senators also mentioned, when they were complaining to the rest of the government, that one of the former FBI agents on this company's payroll was giving Viking tickets to his former FBI colleagues. Now, if you or I were accused of a crime and then we were caught giving away sports tickets or anything to FBI agents, we could be considered bribing or trying to influence. It would be considered a crime if we did. This is going on. Jane Turner is complaining about it. The senators are complaining about it. Does it even make the news? On October 2002, Associated Press did give a little report here. They were saying these 2 senators were, quote, pressing the FBI director to promise not to retaliate against Jane Turner. Now, why would the FBI need senators to press them to behave properly? Picture this, you're the FBI director. What would you think if 2 senators came up to you and said, please don't retaliate against the honest FBI agents? I mean, what would you think? You think, get out of here. I don't need this. This obviously is a sign that some senators don't think too highly of our FBI management. They think our FBI management is dishonest and vengeful. And then you have to ask yourself, if these 2 senators feel this way, are there some FBI agents that are also worried about being honest? Are there some watching what happens to this Jane Turner case and thinking, well, maybe I better be quiet until I see what happens to Jane Turner? There could be a lot of FBI agents who would like to say things, but they're scared because they don't think anyone's going to come to their rescue, and they're going to watch what happens to Jane Turner. Another problem we'll find that when you ignore crimes like this and let them go on, you're going to find some honest people simply quit. They get frustrated. You see this in February 2003. An American diplomat to Greece sent his letter of resignation in to Colin Powell. He says he cannot no longer support the Bush administration's policies. He says that we're creating anger around the world. He can't support this any longer. We're creating disgust of America. But when he quits, what does that do? It leaves an opening for someone else in the government. Bush could possibly get one of his own supporters in there. This allows the rogue group to grow, not get smaller. Another example is Robin Cook. He resigned from a top British government position to protest Blair and his support of Bush and the war in Iraq. But here again, we have possibly an honest government official quitting, and what does that do? It leaves an opening that Blair might be able to fill with one of his own supporters. This would just allow this rogue group to develop in Britain also. Now, what gets even worse is when we look at a person named Ben Johnston. He worked for DynCorp Corporation. After he left the Army, he took a job as an aircraft maintenance technician with DynCorp, and he was sent to Bosnia to maintain American military aircraft. This was in the late 1990s. And a year and a half after he was working at this job, he was fired. Now, you might think it was because he was perhaps incompetent, but he says he was fired because he was complaining about corruption and sex slaves, and he filed a lawsuit against his company. Now, is this a disgruntled employee, or is this guy being serious when he says they're corrupt and buying sex slaves? Could there really be such a thing as sex slaves? In April 2002, the House of Representatives held an investigation into this issue. They had Ben Johnston testify, and they produced a 71-page report about this sex slave issue and posted it on their government website. And in my book, I even put a website to Johnston's testimony because I thought it was so bizarre, you ought to take a look at it. It wasn't very long either. But in March of 2003, a reader of my book sent me an email saying, well, where's that testimony? Your link doesn't seem to work. So I check, and the entire 71-page report has been deleted. Now, when have you seen the government delete one of its own reports like that? Doesn't this imply that there's something about this sex slave issue that they don't want you to know? Furthermore, in April 2002, when they held this meeting, did you hear about it? Did you see this in Time or Newsweek or CNN? Did you know this investigation was even going on? If not, what sort of news reports were you getting in 2002 that were more important in April 2002? Isn't this a sign that our media doesn't consider this to be important, and instead they're focusing on things like Michael Jackson and the Academy Awards or whatever else? An Israeli newspaper also had an article about this where they complained about sex slaves. But in their case, they were complaining about the sex slaves in Israel. They weren't even talking about Bosnia or DynCorp Corporation. And if there are no such things as sex slaves, why do we have all these people complaining about them? It appears to be a worldwide problem. The American Free Press, it's a weekly small newspaper out of Washington, D.C., it had an article December 16th, 2002, and it even had photos of some of the young girls that were being sold as sex slaves. If this issue is serious, why are nobody in the conventional media discussing it? Why is it not on the national news? Why is it not in any of your newspapers or magazines? It's a sign that our media is being influenced, just as those suspicious stock trades are being influenced. Nobody ever investigated them. Somebody is stopping this information from making it out to the media. Now you may wonder, what do I care about the sex slave issue anyway for? What does it have to do with September 11th? Well, what it shows you is that honest people can be driven out of government and businesses. Ben Johnston was fired, for example, because he was complaining about the corruption and the sex slaves. If he is correct with his accusations, there's a division of DynCorp committing a very serious crime. This is beyond just normal shoplifting. You can visualize what's going on here with DynCorp as a cancerous lump growing. When someone gets into this division of DynCorp, if they don't go along with the sex slaves, they're fired. So what do? They get someone else. Eventually, they'll get someone who goes along with it. That allows this group to grow, just like cancer. Johnston also points out that these people have videotapes and photos of them and their sex slaves. This opens them up to blackmail, and this may be why they're doing it. There's those rumors you've probably heard about how the Bush family is involved in this Skull and Bones Association, and one of the ways they keep each other in control and keep each other quiet is to get evidence on one another that's so bad that they tell each other essentially, look, if you talk about me, if you tell what we're doing, then we're going to tell about you. We're all going to go down. You can't talk or we'll all go down together. So that may be what's going on with these sex slaves. They're deliberately getting information about each other so that if any one of them talks, then they're all going to get in trouble. Furthermore, you have to ask yourself, if a person is willing to buy sex slaves, how high are his moral standards? These people may be very easy to bribe and blackmail. So now we have a situation where we have people involved in the CIA, DynCorp, the military, buying sex slaves who probably don't have very high moral standards. Now, what if you want to conduct a fake terrorist attack and you need a little assistance? These would be the perfect people. How hard would these people be to bribe? They may say, yeah, give me $100. A case of beer, I'll do it. How hard would it be? They may not need $1 million to go along with a scam. And bad behavior is everywhere. It's not just in DynCorp. Take a look at the Air Force Academy. This is supposed to be where some of the better Air Force people are at. In March 2003, we find 54 cases of alleged rape and assault being discussed, and the Air Force Secretary says, well, we have some cadets who misused power. Now, to understand how absurd this is, imagine as you walk out of here tonight, a couple of you are raped and assaulted. Would you go home saying, oh, a couple people misused power, no big deal? I mean, what is this? What kind of attitude is this? This is a sign of what we'd call social decay when the Air Force Secretary describes this as misusing of power. This is almost like letting it happen without really getting, as if they don't want to get anybody upset with them at the Air Force Academy. It's a sign that there's so much corruption, so much crime, that they don't want to really say what it is because they don't want the Air Force people to get mad at them. In August 2002, we find about 4,000 ordinary citizens are accused of using ATMs in the New York City area to steal about $15 million from their municipal employees' credit union. Now, remember when those planes crashed into the towers and the towers fell down, a lot of computers were damaged. Somebody noticed that their ATMs were giving them money but not recording it, not taking it out of their account. And so they started thinking, wow, I could take money out of my account and nobody will know. So they kept doing it. And soon 4,000 people had done it. $15 million had been taken out. Well, we know about this because they eventually found out, they fixed the computers and found out, and these people were caught. But it shows you that thousands of people, when there's a problem, are going to take advantage of it. Their moral standards are not that high either. And these are only the people that got caught. There may have been some computers that never got fixed. There may have been other people taking money out. We never did figure that out because the computers were still so totally damaged that nobody knows. In February 2003, it was reported that 90% of the claims by New Yorkers for that special $100 million fund to help victims of the September 11th attack were fraudulent. So here we say, here's a $100 million fund for people who are victims of the attack. All of a sudden, hands are going up. I'm a victim, and I lost so much money. I need so much to recover. And some of them may have been real victims, but they exaggerate the claims. And this is 90% of the claims. This is not even a small number of people. So when you look at the country, what you see is crime is everywhere. It's in business, it's in government, it's among your ordinary citizens. There is no shortage. Now, they may be a small percentage of the population, but there's thousands of these people. That's a small percentage of the population, but that's enough to commit a lot of scams. Now, most people will ignore crimes. Like, take Jeffrey Dahmer's neighbors. They were complaining about the stench coming out of his apartment due to those rotten bodies, but nobody did anything. They complained, but they didn't do anything. It's like with these other crimes. A lot of people will complain about what's going on, but they don't do anything to stop it. And is it possible that there are people like Jeffrey Dahmer working for the CIA or DynCorp and that people are complaining about them, but nobody does anything? Well, yes. Johnston complained, but nobody's done anything. Then you had Jane Turner complaining. Who's done anything about that? You had Colleen Rowley. Nobody did anything about that. You had the other FBI agents complaining. Nobody did anything about them. There are people complaining all over the country. Nobody's doing anything. Now, this could be partly due to apathy. A lot of us are discouraged, and some of us have given up hope. But what does this really do in the long run? It allows the criminals to keep on going. It shows them that they can continue to get away with it. And then you have to ask yourself, is the CIA the only agency that's badly behaved? Britain has their version of a CIA. Isn't it possible that they also have some rogue group operating within it? Israel has the Mossad. Could they also have some rogue group? There are already some documents on the internet in which some people claim to be former Mossad agents who quit out of disgust because they think some of the Mossad agents are out of control. There's Russia, they've got, or they used to have the KGB, who knows what they've got now, but isn't it possible they also have some rogue group within theirs? And what does the Chinese government have? They may have one too. We should consider that all of these secret organizations are badly behaved. In fact, we should consider they're all dangerous. Now let's look at some of the suspicious events of the World Trade Center attack. You probably already know about that suspicious bets about the Chicago Board of Exchange, or how they made about $9 million in profit. I thought I went over this. Did I already go over this? The suspicious bets were made the day before the attack and 2 days before the attack. And they also bet on Morgan Stanley Dean Witter, which occupied 22 floors of the World Trade Center tower. There were some reports that they made $9 million, some are higher, some are lower, but there's millions of dollars being made on this. The Security Exchange and the U.S. Security and Exchange Commissions, the Chicago Board of Options Exchange, and security regulators in Europe and Japan all start an investigation. This is a worldwide investigation. Some of the suspicious trades were being made in Japan and Europe also. It was not just America. And then we even had some government officials in America urging the Security and Exchange Commission's chairman, if you need any help, we're here to help. We want to get to the bottom of this matter. Well, it's been more than a year and we're still waiting. What does that tell you? This is a worldwide investigation. This is more than one nation, and yet somehow there have never been any results. Somehow this group has influence over more than just America. This is a worldwide thing. Now, if you take a look at the airplanes that crashed into these towers or crashed into Pennsylvania, they're all about 80% empty. Now, we've all been in airplanes that have had sometimes empty seats, but when have you seen them 80% empty? And 4 of them in one morning? The airlines go out of their way to avoid this situation. So this is a sign that somebody bought a lot of tickets on those particular flights to block people from getting on. Now, why they blocked the people, no one knows. Maybe it was because they just thought it would be easier to deal with this attack with fewer people on them. But it's also possible that they just didn't want to kill all that many people. They said, oh, we'll be nice, we'll buy up some tickets, and that'll reduce the number of deaths. Now, when I mention that to people that they may be trying to reduce the deaths, then we get this problem that they'll argue with me, well, these people, if they were really going to destroy the towers and all that, why would they care? Why would they want to reduce the deaths? Well, you have to realize that the group that did this, they're not all like Jeffrey Dahmer. If they were all like Jeffrey Dahmer, they may have said, oh, who cares? Let's load the planes up. But they're not going to be all the same. Some will be thinking, kill them all. Some will be thinking, well, let's be nice. And what I think happened is that the people that said, well, let's not kill them all, won out. That's what I suspect. And you'll see the same thing happening at the World Trade Center. There was about 3,000 people dead. You may think that's a lot, but there was potentially 50,000 people in those buildings. Enormous numbers worked there. There was tourists running through the area. Yet, if you look at when those towers collapsed, almost everybody had evacuated both towers. It's as if somebody was watching over the area and waited for those towers to empty. Now, if there was truly people like Jeffrey Dahmer completely dominating this group, they would have had the planes hit lower, or they would have at least brought the towers down sooner. It looks to me like they did it on purpose to reduce casualties, simply because the people who didn't want to kill too many won out over the Jeffrey Dahmer types. The same thing at the Pentagon. Only 124 or 125 deaths, depending on which report you look at. But there's about 24,000 people that work there. The terrorists just happened to hit the part of the building that was almost completely empty because it was being renovated. And one of the purposes of the renovation was to increase the strength of the windows and walls. So this terrorist hit the part of the Pentagon that was the strongest part, and he hit the part that was the emptiest. Now, is that a coincidence? It looks like they just didn't want to kill that many people. Now, another interesting thing that makes it suspicious, there was somebody living down the street from the World Trade Center. He has an apartment. He woke up late September 10th, or it may have been early September 11th, but late at night, around midnight or so. And he decided, well, he'll get some fresh air. He's having trouble getting back to sleep, so he goes out to his balcony, looks out, and he says, the sky looks so funny. The color's not right, and the streets are empty. And so what does he do? He says he decided to go back and get his camera and take a few pictures. Now, he's not a professional photographer, so his pictures are not very good. They just show like a purplish sky. They show some empty streets. But the significance of this is that why would the streets be so empty when they're not normally empty in Manhattan? And why would the sky look different? Well, the sky in the city of Manhattan, or any big city, you can't see stars when you look up. What you see is a reflection of the city lights. You see the office lights, the street lights, the car headlights, and it picks up a certain look. And it's always the same look because it's always the same lights. Well, when he went out to his balcony, the sky looked different. Now, why would it look different? The only explanation that I can think of is that there's a lot of people, knew this attack was coming. They took what they wanted from their offices, turned the lights out. Their lights are no longer on. The sky now looks different because now it's got different lights in other buildings. Plus, the streets are now empty. There's not so many people walking around. To this particular person, this was just a bizarre event, but what it really is a sign of is that a lot of people, knew this attack was coming. Now take a look at the pilot. Remember when I told you that Flight 77 disappeared near Ohio and then popped up again on the radar near the Pentagon? Well, the radar shows that Flight 77 did what they're referring to as a downward spiral, turning almost a complete circle, dropping the last 7,000 feet in 2.5 minutes. And the steep turn was so smooth that what they're saying is that these hijackers had better flying skills than many investigators first believed. So now picture what's going on here. These people who are watching the radar screen are saying, this guy is incredible. This is a great pilot. He's so smooth. He's doing such complex maneuvers. This is an experienced pilot. Let's take a look at this pilot according to the training schools. This is that Hanny Hanjour character. According to the flight school, he was in the Arizona flight school, and they're saying he was failing his courses, but he continued to pay anyway. Take a look at these two employee quotes. He didn't care about the fact that he couldn't get through the course. Or how about this one? I'm still, to this day, amazed that he could have flown into the Pentagon. He could not fly at all. So look at this contradiction. On the one hand, we have flight instructors saying, this guy's a loser. On the other hand, the radar operators are saying, this guy's incredible. Now, who are we going to believe? It's quite possible they're both telling the truth. This guy is a lousy pilot, and whatever came in over the Pentagon was truly spectacular. And why? Because that was not Flight 77. This guy was such a lousy pilot that the flight school called the FAA to complain about him. They complained that he had a limited ability to speak English, and an FAA representative sat in on a class to observe him, but nothing came of it. In fact, all of the pilots were lousy. None of them even seemed to care that they were lousy, and somebody was paying for their flight lessons. Now, why would somebody buy flight lessons for people who were failing and who didn't even care that they were failing? It seems as if these flight lessons were simply for show. By taking flight lessons, and they had this excuse. It was like setting up Tim McVeigh. They could say, well, these are the terrorists, they took flight lessons. Well, sure, they took the flight lessons, but they weren't pilots. It was just for show, to make the whole scam look real. Now, what about the attack? Was it serious enough for an investigation? Some people may say, well, it wasn't that serious. A couple buildings fell down. We had other things to do. We had a terrorist war to fight. We didn't have really the resources and manpower to investigate. Let's take a look at how devastating this attack was. There was a subway that ran under the World Trade Center towers, and it was severely damaged. When those buildings came down, they didn't just fall over. They didn't just break into two pieces. They shattered all the way to the basement, and then they went down to the subway and damaged it. And there are estimates that $7 billion are going to be needed, more than $7 billion just to fix that subway. Then to clean up the mess, the rebuilding and cleaning, they're saying maybe $29 billion. Then there was 50,000 private jobs lost, 20,000 more lost due to other events related to perhaps the economy and the local problems due to the attack, and then an additional 100,000 city workers displaced. I mean, this attack was serious. If a military attacked us like this would be considered quite a hit. Then take a look at the firefighters. Besides the ones that died, after the attack occurred, more than 100 of them were complaining they had such serious respiratory problems that they were given office jobs. They couldn't even deal with being a firefighter any longer. Of the 11,000 firefighters, about 25% were complaining they had respiratory problems of some type. Congress was even giving the airlines billions of dollars in cash, $5 billion, $10 billion in loans, because they were complaining of the September 11th attack was hurting them. So we're giving a lot of tax money to this one industry, and then later they come back and want billions more. So the attack was devastating. Now take a look at the removal of the rubble at the World Trade Center. On the morning of September 12th, Mayor Giuliani announced that in less than one day they had moved 120 dump trucks of debris out of the city. Now your first thought is, well, they're removing the debris because they're looking for survivors, and that makes sense. But this went on day after day, week after week. How could people be alive a month or two later? They're still frantically removing this rubble and dumping it in the garbage. Are they really searching for survivors here? Or are they trying to destroy evidence? During April 2002, the final bits of rubble were removed. But the thick pieces were being sold to foreign nations as scrap metal and at a very low price. And the less valuable pieces were being buried. Now, the editor of Fire Engineering magazine wrote months earlier that this destruction of rubble is illegal. He even looked through the laws. He said he was trying to find if there was even an exception to this. He said he couldn't even find one exception. This was illegal for them to do this. And then you have to ask, why, when they sold this metal for scrap, did they sell it to the foreign nations like China and North Korea? Why not the American companies? Well, selling it to the foreign nations gets it out of here completely. You're never going to see it once it's over there. There were only a few pieces that ended up being saved for investigations. The majority of it is gone, either sold for scrap into a foreign nation or dumped in a landfill. And they knew this was illegal. Now, look at the cries for help. Some people may say, well, I'm just giving you this hindsight, this 2020 business. Well, it wasn't. Take a look at what was going on at the time. You got stuff like this. President of the Structural Engineers Association of New York. We are asking for volunteers to help collect data. Now, why would we have to ask for volunteers? As I tried to point out earlier, this attack was devastating. Shouldn't we at least be able to fund an investigation to an attack this serious? We had no problem finding $40 million to investigate Bill Clinton and Monica, yet we got to depend on volunteers to investigate an attack this serious? Bill Manning, the editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, was asking members of the fire departments to a call to action. He was asking them to send email to the Congress, to the president, telling them to stop the destruction of rubble, that we want an investigation. He was so frustrated, he was accusing the FEMA investigation of being a half-baked farce. But did this even make the news? How many of you even heard of this accusation? How many of you even heard of this email campaign? Here's a guy accusing this government investigation of being a half-baked farce, and yet this doesn't get out on CNN or Time or Newsweek. This is a sign that our media only gives you certain events, not the real events going on, not the real news. Other cries for help were coming also from January from other firemen. They were saying also for an email campaign, and you can see the frustration. They were starting to get sarcastic. One of them wrote, "You would think we would have the largest fire investigation in world history. You would be wrong. Instead, we have a series of unconnected and uncoordinated superficial inquiries." Now they're getting frustrated. This is what's going on in the country. A lot of people have been complaining these things are illegal, there's crime, there's corruption. They get frustrated, no one's listening to them. This is what helps allow criminal organizations to exist. People can complain about them and nobody does anything. So what does that do? The criminals, if anything, are laughing at it. Now let's take a look at some of the suspicious aspects of the rubble at the World Trade Center, and this might help you understand why they were so frantically hauling it away. On December 19th, the governor of New York announced that finally the underground fires in the rubble were extinguished. Now, the rubble was mostly steel, so you have to wonder what is even burning down there for 3 months. And for 3 months, remember, they were spraying water on it. There had been rain and drizzle. How could these fires be burning for 3 months? If you look at the towers before they collapsed, there were only a couple fires. Well, start looking at some of the reports about what that rubble was. There were a few pieces of rubble that were saved. They didn't get sent to China. There were a few that were salvaged. One of them was examined by some of the scientists, and in a scientific journal, the Journal of Metals and Materials, they gave an analysis in which they said, this is a really strange steel beam we've got here. It's got some melted steel and some strange sulfur compounds. And they produced what they referred to as a preliminary report. Well, where's the final report? What happened with this melted steel with the strange sulfur compounds? We don't know. This is like the suspicious stock trades. The final report never made it. It's a sign that these people not only can influence the stock investigations and the media, they're also stopping scientific investigations. 5 days after the attack, NASA and the U.S. Geological Survey produced this thermal map. Now, firemen were spraying water on this rubble for those 5 days, and the rubble would have cooled on its own anyway. So you'd think that after 5 days, the rubble would be a bit cooler. Well, Building 7 and the South Tower had locations 5 days later that were above the melting point of aluminum. They marked the 8 hottest locations with these letters. At the top of the picture, you see letters A and B. That's Building 7. Letter A shows an area that's above 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. Aluminum melts at about 1,200. The surface temperature is what this thermal chart is showing, not the subsurface temperature. The airplane flew over and it's measuring the infrared radiation as it comes off the top of the rubble. So this is the surface temperature. A at the surface, at that letter A, it's 1,300 degrees. If you were to lay aluminum on that, it would start to melt. G is another location above 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. It could also melt aluminum. That's in the area of the South Tower. The location of the North Tower is around C and D. That's hot, but not quite as hot. Now you have to ask yourself, how could these places be above the melting point of aluminum 5 days after the attack? Christopher Bolin of the American Free Press spoke with Mark Lazo, who's president of Controlled Demolition Incorporated, and Mark told them steel had melted at the bottom of the basements. This is after they've finally pulled all the rubble out. He gets down to the bottom of the basements and he finds some steel had melted. Peter Tully, he's president of another company hired to remove debris, and when he confirmed it. He saw it too. Steel had melted at the bottom of the basements of Building 7 and the towers. So this would explain why the fires were burning for so long, why the rubble was so hot. At the bottom of the basements, it's at melting steel. Steel doesn't melt until you get around 2,500, 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. That would explain why the surface is about 1,300 degrees. If it's 2,500 down in the basement. But jet fuel cannot produce those kind of temperatures. See, jet fuel, gasoline, kerosene, diesel fuel, they're all the same. They're all hydrocarbons. None of them, no matter what you do, cannot exceed about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit when you burn them in the atmosphere. It's the same as the butane stoves or natural gas stoves or a candle flame. They're all hydrocarbons. It doesn't matter which one you pick. They're all going to burn about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit maximum. And that maximum can only be reached when you mix the hydrocarbons and the air in perfect proportions, such as a kitchen stove. That's when you get those clean flames rather than the orange and soot that you see from airplane crashes. So jet fuel could not possibly have been the reason that burned. Now you may think, well, carpeting, paper, wood, no, they're the same thing. It doesn't matter. You can't do it. There's nothing that can, in those office buildings, that could have burned hot enough to melt that steel. Now blast furnaces can melt steel, but then they use coal, which is basically carbon, and they use blasts of hot air, and they use special furnaces. Coal, which is carbon, burns at a higher temperature than hydrocarbons. So it can reach a higher temperature, but it's only in those special furnaces that it can actually melt the steel. If you look through history, you can see this. Throughout most of history, our ancestors only had copper, brass, bronze. Iron has been very difficult for people to melt because you can't do it with jet fuel, diesel fuel, gasoline, crude oil. It's very difficult to melt it. It was only until about a century ago that the blast furnace was developed, and finally you can melt iron in a practical manner. So what can produce temperatures hot enough to melt steel? Well, they can exceed 3,000 or even 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if there were explosives in the basement of this building, first of all, it would have to be big explosives because the steel at the bottom of these towers was up to 4 inches thick. If you've ever worked with steel plate that's a 1/4 inch thick, you know how strong that stuff is. Picture steel 4 inches thick. You're going to have some powerful explosives there. Now, they're deep underground. There's solid rock all over the place on the walls. You got rubble pouring down the top. If these explosives were detonated down in the basement, where's the heat going to go? It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to stay there, and it's going to possibly melt a lot of steel. That would explain the melted steel. Now you got all this heat in the basement coming up, trickling upward through the rubble. That would explain why the surface of the rubble is above the melting point of aluminum 5 days later. Now let's look at some of the suspicious behavior of the U.S. government officials. Take a look at Bush and Cheney. CNN reported that there was a rare call from Dick Cheney to Daschle to limit the investigation of the events of September 11th. Now it's rare because they refer to this as a rare call because how often do Cheney and Daschle talk to each other on the phone? It's not very common. But he calls them up and he wants to limit the investigation. Now what does that mean, limit the investigation? 2 days later, President Bush asked him, because whatever Cheney wanted, Daschle wasn't going along with. So Bush calls him and talks to him, personally talks to him, and tries to get him to limit the investigation. Now they're saying to Daschle, look, we don't have enough people and resources to investigate the attack on September 11th. We have to fight this war on terrorism. How could America, a country this large and this wealthy, not have enough people or resources to investigate an attack that's this serious? This is simply a sign they didn't want to investigate, and they're using this as an excuse. And then look at some of the other things. Is our government even trying to help the USA? Or is their motives mainly to control the world? I already mentioned our train system is terrible. Our cities are also disorganized. They're haphazard jumbles of buildings. Government and universities are swelling with people as unemployed people just start looking for some job to take since their businesses have vanished. But our government's focus is on war, weapons, and hatred, not on making our cities better, not on making our train system better, not on making our economy better. And then if you want to get a better idea of just how bad our federal government is, compare it to your local city officials. My own brother's wife works for the county government, and there was a time she was working on a project to help improve our local downtown section. She was trying to get the business owners and other people to work together to come up with a better design so for traffic to get through better, for pedestrians, and just to make the place more attractive. Now, not much has happened because of all the fighting between business owners and arguments and all, but the point I'm making is that some local officials are actually trying to make our cities better, our lives better. But then compare that to the federal officials whose focus is on this axis of evil, on war and on weapons. Our federal government finds it more beneficial to spend billions to help Osama fight the Northern Alliance. They'll give billions to help the Northern Alliance now fight Osama. They'll give billions to help Saddam and give him weapons to fight with Iran. And then they'll spend billions more to fight Iraq and This is what they consider good policies. They don't spend much of anything to make the country a nice place. They're focusing on other nations. They're focusing on war and weapons. But we do have local officials focusing on making America better. This is a sign that our federal government has got people in it whose more concern is other nations and controlling those other nations rather than making America a better place. In 2002, President Bush told the CIA to go ahead and conduct covert operations to topple Saddam Hussein. And Bush says, you are now authorized to use lethal force. Now, is the CIA some personal killing force of the president? Is this legal? Is this what the Constitution was all about? Is this what the president is supposed to be doing with his time? Why is this focus on war so extreme with Bush and these other high government officials? Why are we bombing other nations rather than impressing them with beautiful trains and beautiful cities, a beautiful social environment? Why are we creating fear in other nations rather than impressing them and giving them good feelings about us? Isn't this a sign that our federal government is under control of some rogue group whose goal is to control the world rather than make America a better place? Shouldn't we be having a government whose goal is to make America a nice spot and inspire other nations to follow in our footsteps? Another interesting thing about this whole group is that it looks almost like some people are trying to bring back the monarchy. Christopher Bolin was pointing out of the primary support for the war in Europe is what we might call the royal families. The royal family of England, the Queen of Holland, the King of Spain, plus a lot of these rich people that just inherit their wealth. Some of the nations that oppose us, such as France and Germany, don't have these royal families. Is this a coincidence? Maybe, but it may also be that a lot of these rich people who inherit their wealth are simply joining together to make their situation, to extend it, to bring back the Middle Ages in which they pass on wealth from father to son, and the rest of us are their peasants. Bush and the Rockefellers are just two examples of these American versions of royal families. We've got a whole bunch of them. Colin Powell's another one. His son is chairman of the FCC. Now, did he earn that position, or was that because of his father? In this position, he has some influence over the media. One of the things he's trying to do right at this moment is to allow media companies to expand. In case you didn't know this, there is a law that says no one company is allowed to own all television stations. No one company can own all radio stations or all newspapers. What Colin Powell's son is trying to do right now is allow them to get bigger than they are currently allowed to do. He's trying to let them buy up more. Now, why is this? Is this to help America? Is his goal to make America a better place or make our media better? Our media didn't tell us about the sex slave investigation. Is this supposed to help us? Is this going to give us better news? Or is he simply trying to help this group get control of our media so that they can then completely dominate it and completely suppress anything they don't want? This makes you wonder, what is Colin Powell about if his son is doing this sort of thing? There's even rumors that Clear Channel is buying up radio talk stations, even the ones that are unprofitable. Now, why would a company buy up an unprofitable talk radio station if it's not for something such as suppressing what they're saying? The military is another one. General Tommy Franks, he claims to have been in high school with Laura and George Bush. And unlike other generals, he never went to the academy. Now, if you know military people, they follow all these regimented schedules and do all these things in very orderly manners. They get generals as they come from the academy and they get promoted. This guy didn't follow the normal procedure. Why was he promoted to general? Was it because of his relationship with George Bush? And what was he doing in Afghanistan? Was it to help George Bush, or was it to help America? Was he simply helping George Bush and the oil companies get that pipeline through? Is the U.S. military becoming a personal military force of George Bush? The FBI and CIA are also showing the same thing. In May 2002, John Ashcroft and Robert Mueller reported to implement high-profile changes at the FBI's headquarters, including closer ties to the CIA. Now, our government doesn't bother to explain that, but let's think about this. They're going to implement high-profile changes at the headquarters. Doesn't that sound like they're going to put in who they want in the management and get rid of who they want? They're going to change it the way they want to change it. They're putting in their friends, people that support them. And the FBI also plans to hire 900 agents. Would they hire people like me who complain like this? How about Jane Turner? Would they want more people like her or Colleen Rowley? Or are they going to use this opportunity to start finding people that support their crimes and give them an opportunity to grow and become stronger? The U.S. military is doing the same thing. In April 2002, military officials reported that President Bush approved widespread changes at the top of the U.S. military that will put in place a new generation of relatively nonconformist officers who are likely to be more supportive of the administration's goal of radically changing the armed forces. Now, what's the administration's goal? What are they radically changing our armed forces into? They don't even bother to say this, but what it sounds like is they're going to make these widespread changes at the top to get rid of the people they don't like and bring in more of their friends, turning the military into their personal military force. We also have a lot of attempts to silence critics of the government and this Bush administration, the war on Iraq. The American Council of Trustees and Alumni, for example, they sound, when you first hear about them, to be a very reputable organization. They complain about the educational system of America. They say our educational system is bad. And we'd all agree with that, I'm sure. I think our educational system is terrible. But I think it's terrible because we don't really learn much as you go through it. It costs a lot of money, and what do you really get out of it? Well, they're saying, according to one of their reports, one of the bad things about our educational system is that universities have failed to back up the war on terrorism 100%. That's what they consider one of the failures of our educational system. Plus, they're saying these universities are reinforcing the mindset that it was America to blame for this September 11th attack. So they're not saying that our school system's bad because kids don't learn anything or they're picking up bad attitudes. They're saying they're bad because they don't support George Bush and this war in Iraq. This is nothing more than an attempt to silence critics, but they're deceiving you by saying, well, they're here to improve education. And they say different things to different people. In March 2002, the Bush administration agreed to finance an expanded investigation into the collapse of the towers. By this time, almost all of the rubble was gone, so it doesn't really do much good to expand the investigation since there's nothing much left to look at, but it sounds good. Now he can say it. Now that the rubble's almost gone, he can make remarks like, yeah, let's investigate. Now it makes it look good. He sounds like he's on our side. But by October 2002, Lieberman, McCain, and Pelosi have a news conference, and Pelosi complains that the invisible hand of the White House was stopping the investigation. But think about this. Here's Lieberman and McCain now. Lieberman was one of the people involved in that alumni association. This one here, the Council of Trustees and Alumni. He was one of their primary leaders, complaining that universities are bad for not backing up this war on terrorism 100%. Yet here he is saying to people, oh, the White House is bad because they didn't investigate. He'll say whatever you want to hear. On one hand, he's saying, if you don't back up the war 100%, you're bad. On the other hand, he's saying, oh, the White House, we should have had an investigation, but the White House stopped it. These people will tell you whatever you want. If our government really wanted an investigation, they would have had it. Compare the difference in the investigation of the World Trade Center attack and the war on Iraq. With the war on Iraq, the United Nations was saying, don't do it. There were nations all around the world saying, don't do it. There were demonstrations in the street, don't do it. There were people in America saying, don't do it. Bush did it anyway. His attitude was like, so what? I don't care what you say. Now compare that to the investigation. The United Nations never told us, don't investigate. There were no demonstrations in foreign countries that said, don't investigate. There were no people in America saying, don't investigate. In fact, they were saying, investigate. There were magazine articles such as Fire Engineering saying, we want an investigation. And yet Bush said, no, I don't care. We don't want it. If our government wanted it, there would have been one, even if the United Nations said, don't do it. So this is a sign they didn't want one. It's that simple. And why would our government not want an investigation? Because it looks, when you look closely at it, to be a scam of immense proportions. Let's start with Building 7. Now, this is a 47-story building with a steel frame. This is not a concrete building. It's not wood. It's got a steel frame. This, what you're looking at right here, is the front side of it. The towers and Building 6, 5, and 4 and all the others would be off to its left. Here's a close-up of the fires. The government tells us that fire caused this building to collapse. There's a photographer came walking down about 3 p.m., and when he got up to the back end of it, he took a photo of the back end. I've zoomed in on it here. This shows the only fires on the entire back side of the building. And you can see they're not even on the entire floors. There's just 2 floors, and they don't even, it's only a couple windows within those 2 floors. Now, this is the back side. There weren't many fires anywhere else either. So how did these fires destroy the building? This is 3 p.m. These fires supposedly started at about 9 in the morning when the airplane crashed into the South Tower. Supposedly, somehow, some magic piece of debris flew over there and started a couple fires. Now, so these fires at 3 p.m., these have been burning since 9. That's many, many hours. Now, remember what I said about the South Tower. If a fire starts over here, never makes it over to this side of the building, how serious is that? These fires here have been burning for, what is this, 6 hours? And they haven't even gone to the next office yet. How serious are these fires? Yet here's what they did to the building. This is a view from an airplane looking down on this building. This rubble, this is the 47 stories down onto a little teeny tiny pile of rubble. And you have to ask yourself, how did a couple fires do this? No fire has ever done this before. No airplane crashed into that building, and the towers didn't fall onto it. This building collapsed at 5:30 in the evening. There was nothing to cause it to collapse. Well, we had a government agency, FEMA, investigating this, and in May 2002, they produced a report. And their report is, well, we don't know. We don't know how the fires got started, and we don't know how the building collapsed from those fires. They're basically playing stupid, just like the Pentagon was playing stupid when they said, well, we don't know how the time could be wrong. They apparently have the attitude that by saying nothing, people will soon forget about the incident and go on. Well, you may think, well, maybe fire did cause it to collapse like that. But according to the editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, fire has never destroyed a steel building. And the fire in this building was so small, the sprinkler system should have been able to extinguish it. So how do these small fires do what no fire had ever done before? Even larger fires had never done it. Take a look at how Building 7 fell down. The video of it falling down is a little more spectacular, but the still photo gives you some idea. It was falling down vertically, just like they do in demolitions. And you see the dust coming from the bottom of it as it comes down, just like in demolitions. This is a sign that explosives had been placed into it, and it was just in the same exact manner that all old buildings are demolished. Now, normally, if a 47-story steel building were to crumble like that from a little fire, people all over the world would be shocked and want to know what happened. Architects would want to know what happened so that they could design buildings better, for example. People who live or work in tall buildings would wonder, can fire do this to my building? But nobody cares. Nobody's asking. We're the architects saying, what happened? We need to make sure we don't make buildings like that again. Well, part of the reason nobody's asking, part of the reason nobody cares is that a lot of people don't even know about this. Building 7 has tremendous secrecy about it. You saw the reporters, the television reporters, repeating Osama's face, and you saw them repeating the crash of the South Tower. But how often did they show you Building 7 collapsing? How many magazine articles did you see that about Building 7? Did Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, did Time Magazine, did any of your newspapers give you any reports about Building 7 Any photos of Building 7? Why the secrecy? Because nobody can explain how Osama caused that building to collapse. And by keeping it a secret, nobody will ever ask, well, what happened to Building 7? Well, let's look at what's on that building. On the 23rd floor was a $15 million renovated section. It was turned into an emergency command center for Mayor Giuliani. It had bullet and bomb-resistant windows. It had its own air supply. It had its own water supply, and it had protection from a 160-mile-per-hour wind. Now, the bullet-resistant windows isn't all that strange. There's banks that have that. But what about this air supply? Why do they have their own air supply? And it's only the 23rd floor, you see. The building is 47 stories. Why would they be putting these protections on only one floor? The rest of the windows are ordinary. The rest of the building doesn't have an air supply. Why this one floor? Well, it was supposedly to help Mayor Giuliani. If there was an anthrax attack in the city, he could run up there and hide and be protected until they cleaned up the anthrax. But it wasn't a hotel, so if there was an anthrax attack, he'd have to hopefully have it done by that day. It was only good for a day, really. It wouldn't be a place for very many people, and it wouldn't be easy for them to sleep. So it was basically for a one-day attack. But why would they want this on a one-day attack, and why would they put it on the 23rd floor? Well, take a look at when the North Tower came down. That building in front of the North Tower is Building 7. When that tower came down, clouds of dust and concrete grit, pieces of metal were thrown hundreds of feet. The only people protected would have been in Building 7, in that emergency command center. They would be able to sit there on the 23rd floor, observing the entire area, watching the whole thing, and be protected from the dust. They had their own air. They had their own water. They had this protection from a 160-mile-per-hour wind. They had protection from these flying pieces of metal. So this was a perfect location for the people to conduct this scam. Now remember earlier I said, it looks as if somebody deliberately let the people out of the towers before they collapsed them. This would explain how this could be done. The people, if there were people on this 23rd floor in this command center, they had a view of the entire area. They could look down and see when people were coming out of the towers and when they stopped coming out. And then they could say, okay, they're out of the South Tower now, let's set it off. And then they demolished that building. Then they could do the North Tower. It just so happened that people evacuated the South Tower much sooner. The South Tower started to evacuate as soon as the North Tower was hit. The North Tower was hit first, and then some of the people immediately in the South Tower started to leave. Their elevators were still working at that time, so they could get out fast. Whereas people in the North Tower, they had to walk down a lot of stairs. So it took a long time for the North Tower to evacuate. But the South Tower collapsed after just about everybody had gotten out of it. This could be explained by the people on that 23rd floor. Now the city government says they evacuated the entire building at 9 in the morning, but how do we know everybody evacuated? It's possible that the people involved in this scam remained inside on that 23rd floor. Now take a look at the World Trade Center towers. The government wants to tell us that the towers fell down, that the fire heated the beams up or practically melted them, and then they fell down. But these towers did not fall down or break into pieces. Now there's an incredible sequence of photos. Now you all know how magazines fight each other, especially for cover photos. They're always looking for spectacular photos. There's a sequence of 5, this shows 4 of them, of the South Tower as it's coming down. You never see these photos. I have them in my book. I gave them full page. They cover the entire full page, each one. I thought they were so spectacular, I wanted each one to have its own page. But after I published the book, I started hearing people saying they never saw these photos before, which I thought was rather odd. They're Reuters photos. You can pick them up, and any news magazine would buy them. So why aren't they in any news magazines? Why aren't Time and Newsweek fighting for these photos? Well, let's take a look at close-up at one of these. They have puffs of dust flying out the windows. before that part of the building collapsed. After the clouds of dust fly out of here horizontally, then that section collapses. And you can see in this sequence of 5 photos how this thing progresses. The puffs come out, that portion then later collapses into little pieces. You can see pieces of metal flying out horizontally also. Here's a closer view of that, the puffs of dust, and you can see a couple more on the other side. Off to the left, you see those pieces of metal. Those are pieces of the outer coverings along the tower columns. And this stuff is flying out horizontally. It's not falling down. It's flying out. If you've ever thrown dust, pick up a handful of dust sometimes and throw it as hard as you can. You can't get it very far. This dust flew out hundreds of feet horizontally. There had to be some pressure, extreme pressure, pushing this out. And one way to explain it is that there are explosives going off floor by floor by floor. As they go off, they send out this dust and they break the beams. Then that part of the building collapses. Now, those pieces of metal that you saw flying out, look at the rubble, look at the World Trade Center afterwards. You see them all over the rooftops of the nearby buildings. It looks like they were decorated with tinsel. These towers, they were shredded into pieces and blown hundreds of feet away. If they had simply fallen over, wouldn't this stuff have just dropped down? Here's a closer view. It looks they're almost all the same size, as if the explosives had been placed in basically every 10 or 12 feet. They're almost identical lengths. If a building had fallen down, wouldn't there be a little bit more variety in the lengths of some of these pieces? Now, the South Tower, the way it fell down is another thing that's a real secrecy. You can see here it's tilted. The base portion is still intact, but the top portion has broken off. It's severed completely from the top, and it's falling over. Now, the towers are 200 feet wide. This piece that has broken off is about 300 feet. It's already fallen down a little, but it's about 300 feet tall and 200 feet on each side. Now, pick a building up that size and lay it in almost any city, and you have a giant skyscraper. All by itself, this one little piece that's broken off is a giant skyscraper for most people. Here it looks small, but you have to realize this is a massive piece of building here. And it's starting to tilt over. You can see it right in this photo. Here it's tilting more, yet it's not yet fallen over. It's disappearing into clouds of dust. So you'd expect, now that you saw that this piece is falling, you'd expect it to continue to fall and tilt and hit the ground. And you'd expect that when we take a photo of the rubble, we'd find some big chunks of this piece of building on the rubble. But when you look at the rubble, it doesn't matter where you look, all you're going to find is dust. So thick that it's leaving tire tracks, footprint marks. It looks as if a volcano had erupted in this area. This piece of building that fell down, it should have landed on Building 4, which is directly underneath it. That tilted section, even if a portion of it disintegrated and only this wedge-shaped piece survived, this wedge-shaped piece should have crashed down onto Building 4. We should have seen it, but you can't find it. It never hit the ground. It never made it past the clouds of dust. How do you explain that? There's only one explanation, that is that it was full of explosives and it was being demolished as it was falling. If we look on the ground, all we find are short pieces of steel. Both towers completely disintegrated into pieces of steel, basically less than the trucks that were hauling them away. They're almost all the same size. There are hardly any that had to be cut up to be hauled away. It looks like these towers had been put through a shredding machine. There's no pieces of steel assemblies. There's no floors that held together. Where are the elevators? Where are the staircases? Where are the office furnitures? You can't even find computers. There's a documentary. You can rent the DVD at Blockbuster Video, 9/11, the filmmaker's commemorative edition. It has interviews of some of the firemen. One of them says he was searching for survivors, and the largest piece of office equipment he found was a piece of keypad maybe this big. It wasn't even the full keypad, just a piece of a keypad. Now, how can two buildings completely fall down and completely shatter every single piece of office furniture from the top to the basement? The people, the furniture, the concrete, they were disintegrated into such small pieces of metal, that small pieces of items, that they were being picked up with buckets. This is how small everything was. There were no pieces of anything, only steel and dust. Now you might think, well, perhaps the buildings were just designed badly. You get those reports once in a while that, well, maybe this was a tube design, or maybe the steel wasn't strong enough. I mean, this steel, look, take a look at these beams. There's a rectangular beam in this photo, and there's a square beam. The rectangular beams were on the inside of the tower. Those square beams ran up along the outside. And the walls on these beams were up to 4 inches at the bottom of the tower, and they went up to about 1/4 inch thick at the top. Now this is a simplified diagram of how the floors were made, how the towers were built. There are 4, I shows here 4 of the columns in the center. There were actually 47 total rectangular columns in the center. There are 236 columns running along the outside of this tower, although there's only 16 shown in this diagram. There's a lot of steel in this building. Each floor was a mesh of steel trusses. They were crisscrossing each other. They formed a rectangular grid, and on top of this grid was a corrugated steel pan. And on top of that, concrete was poured to make a flat, fireproof floor. The concrete was not a structural material. It was simply a fireproof, flat floor. So there's 110 of these floors, 110 steel meshes, 110 of these concrete pans, concrete in a corrugated steel pan. There's a lot of steel, a lot of concrete, and yet all of it broke it into little teeny pieces. There's not any big chunks of concrete. There's no big chunks of steel trusses. There's no big chunks of steel assemblies. There's no big chunks of stairways. All of it disintegrated. Now, you might say, well, maybe the fires were more intense than it appears. Take a look at this photo here. This is the North Tower. This is the hole created by the airplane. Now, first of all, you can't even find any flames in this tower. These holes are black. Where are the flames? Remember that photo I showed you of the real fires? Real fires shatter windows. Real fires, you have flames. Real fires are producing smoke. These are black. These windows, there's a few broken windows where the airplane hit, but the rest of the windows aren't shattered. There's hardly any flames. And if we look closely at this photo, we find a woman and a man standing there in the broken window areas. Now, how did a woman get over here? She's standing in the area by the engines. Here's a closer view of her, and next to her, it looks like there might be another woman laying down, looking over the edge. It looks like both of these women are standing at the edge, looking over. Now, why they're looking over is anyone's guess. I think they might be wondering what the people were jumping for, because there were up to 200 people jumping out of these towers above these women. And maybe these women thought, well, there's perhaps something down there, a giant net or a giant inflatable bag that they're jumping into. So they decided to check it out. That's all I can guess. But what you have to ask yourself is, how did this woman get here? We're told that this airplane hit the building, sent fire all over the place. Fires are everywhere. They're so extreme. They're buckling the steel. Some people are trying to pretend that they melted steel, yet this woman's walking around in it? How could she walk around in these fires if they're that serious? Here's the man. How did he get over here? He's on the floor above the women. He's on a different floor. This is a sign that that floor didn't even have many serious fires, if this man is walking around in them. Now, you also have to ask yourself, this is just one photo. It shows 2 people, possibly 3. What are the chances that when a photographer clicks his camera, he gets the only 2 people alive in that section of the building at that particular moment in time? It's a good possibility that all he got was the 2 people that just happened to be brave enough to stand there in front of those holes at that particular moment. There may be other people in that building trying to get down the stairs, for example. That's what I'd be trying to do. I wouldn't have walked next to that window like that woman had done. I think I'd be much too scared. Now, when this plane hit the building, it's taller than 1 floor, so it would have crashed through at least 2, most likely 3 floors. And that's what the photo shows. It shows at least 3 floors are being demolished. So flying debris would have gone flying through 3 floors. The jet fuel would have splattered all over the place. How did anybody survive this? For anybody to survive this means that they had to be in an area that did not have flying debris or jet fuel. Or the jet fuel had burned itself out. Because she had to be somewhere else and she had to walk over there. That means the fires either never were there or they burned out by the time she walked over there. Which then you have to ask yourself, if the fires were already burning out and she's walking around, how could they be turning this massive steel structure into a pile of dust? So there's something extremely suspicious about this attack. Our government wants us to believe the fire did this, yet there's no evidence in the photos that the fires were intense. There's no evidence that these airplanes had any effect on the structure. Some people might tell you, well, the airplanes were so severe, they were so powerful, they damaged this structure. But take a look at the video of the airplanes hitting the towers. The towers just wobbled a little bit one way and then went back and stood motionless. The people inside the tower said, yeah, they felt the tower tilt and then it went back. And then it just stayed there. These towers didn't even shake much when the airplanes crashed into them. They didn't even wobble enough to be seen on video. So how serious was this? If an airplane had crashed into a house, it would have shattered it completely and thrown it hundreds of feet. It hit these towers, they just bent a little and went back. Strong winter storms would cause these towers to shake more than these airplane crashes. This is a sign that these airplanes did not have enough strength to destroy the towers, that these towers were so strong that they could survive the airplane crash. And then we have no evidence that the fires were intense. So what are we left with? We're left with the conclusion that the airplanes could not destroy the towers, the fire could not destroy the towers. What are we left with? The only possibility is explosives. No fire has ever caused a fireplace grate to destroy itself, and they've got sometimes natural gas flames burning underneath, while there's hot coals burning on the top of them. No steel automobile, barbecue, or any other steel structure has ever been demolished or destroyed from fire. So why should we believe that on September 11th, fire did what it has never done before and has never done since? So you may wonder, well, how could explosives be done? Think of cell phones. You all have imagine if you all have cell phones right now. I could dial any one of you up, set your ringer off. Replace that ringer with an explosive. I dial your number, the explosive goes off. Dial someone else's number, his explosive goes off. Take that same concept, little packages of explosives with a little radio receiver, start scattering them up in the building, put them up in the ceiling tiles. If maintenance people were to walk up into those buildings, poke around in the ceiling tiles, put these explosives up there in the right locations, they'd have all the explosives set in the right spot, and they just trigger them the way they want. A computer would then detonate them in the manner they want to detonate them. What you have to now look at is these scams are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. In 1947, we had LSD experiments. That's not too big. Then we had President Kennedy being killed. That's still not that big of a thing. 1995, it gets a little more severe. They're blowing up buildings with people in them. In 2001, on September 11th, they're hijacking airplanes, demolishing big buildings while people are inside. In 2002, we have suitcase nukes going off. You have to wonder now, what about this SARS virus? Is that thing for real, or is that another one of their plans to reduce the population or devastate some nation? So what's going on here is that the scams are getting bigger and bigger. They're getting away with them. One of the reasons they're getting away with them is nobody will listen to what any of us have to say. Nobody's listening to Jane Turner at the FBI or Colleen. Nobody is listening to the Fire Engineering magazine. People are apathetic. They're getting discouraged. Nothing's happening. No one's talking. And you have to wonder what's going to be next. See, what's going on right now, the world is slowly getting angry at us. You see demonstrations in the street against the war in Iraq. When have we ever demonstrated against someone else's war? They're demonstrating against us, and just a couple days ago I got an email that there are 2 countries, I think it was France and Holland, they're saying boycott American products. Now, no nation will officially do that, but you can imagine what's going to happen if the citizens around the world start boycotting American products. Not everybody, but just some. We are going to have possibly a situation where many countries, not the countries, but the individual citizens are turning against America and Israel. What are these people going to do Are they going to now add France to the axis of evil? Holland? Is this going to turn into some international, incredible war? Are they going to let those other nations boycott us and ruin our economy? Or is this part of their plan? It's probably not part of their plan. What I think is their big mistake is they put too much emphasis on controlling America and not watching the rest of the world. The rest of the world is now turning against America and Israel. We are setting ourselves up, or they are setting us up for an incredible international fight.
Okay, now the question becomes, what do we do about all of this? And it's a very simple answer. He was just alliterating to where are we going with all of this. And of course, we as prophecy students know and understand where we're going. We're heading toward the Daniel's 70th week and the tribulation. We're heading toward a time when the sea and the waves will roar and men's hearts will fail them for looking after what is coming upon them. We're looking upon a time when a great earthquake will happen and smoke will come pouring up out of the earth. We're looking at the time, Revelation 6:12 says, that the sun and the moon and the stars will not give her light, and the constellations and the whole heavens will roll back like a scroll. We're heading to some pretty tough times. So what is this? What are we talking about tonight? I believe that we're simply in the early pleadings of God. God is pleading with America and pleading with the world for us to repent and turn back to Jesus. And I realize a lot of people here tonight and a lot of people watching this video are probably saying, well, I already have Jesus in my heart. So I have a special challenge for you tonight. We're also going to give people that may be watching this videotape that have not ever asked Jesus into their heart to do so. First of all, why should we ask Jesus into our heart? Well, Isaiah says that our sins separate us between us and God. The sins have to be removed. If we want God's protection in the days ahead, we have to have a clean heart. We have to stop sinning, turn to Jesus with our whole heart so He can save us in the day of trouble. How do we get our sins washed away? How do we get washed clean? Well, first of all, we have to realize that we're sinners, that we have done wrong. Now, with many of us, that may not be a problem, but I've actually met some people that don't think that they've done anything wrong. So Romans 3:28 says, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." We also have to realize that we can never be good enough. We can't put enough in the plate. We can't feed enough of the poor. We can't attend church enough. We can never do anything good enough to earn our. Ephesians 2:8-9 says, "For it is by grace you are saved, through faith, and that not of yourselves, is a gift from God, not of works, lest any man should boast." Okay, if it's a gift from God, then how do you take that gift? Romans 10:9-10 gives the answer. Very simple. It says, "If thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God has raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. For with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, confession is made unto salvation." What's that saying? It's simply saying this. It's not enough to believe and not say it. It's not enough to say it and not really believe. We've got to believe and we've got to say it. Acts 2:38 says, "Repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ, for the remission of your sins, and you shall receive the gift of the Holy Ghost." But we don't hear that R word, that repent word, in America anymore. Why? We're going to be blessed, blessed, blessed. Well, I tell you what I believe made America great is the fact that she repented. In fact, she received Jesus, and we need to get back to that again. So let's repent. It's very simple. Let's say this side of the podium represents evil, and let's say this side of the podium represents holiness. All right, now here we were walking through life, not thinking we'd done too much wrong, or maybe some of us knowing we'd done a whole lot wrong, but sooner or later the Holy Spirit comes tapping on our heart. Boy, you need to be getting saved. You need to receive this Jesus. I can remember the age of 9, sitting in the pew, listening to my preacher, and all of a sudden it's like God just pulled back the curtains. And I could see and I could understand what Jesus did for me. He died on the cross. And if I just receive Him, I could get my sins washed away, get my sins written, so I'll get to go to heaven. At 9 years old, He opens the curtains and He let me see. Let me just tell you, If he doesn't open the curtains, you're not going to see. Because no one calls Jesus Lord except the Holy Spirit draws them. Now, so he knocks on our heart. We say, Lord Jesus, come into my heart. But boy, we sure aren't over there in holiness yet. So how do we get over there? Well, one step at a time. Because Jesus said, if you love me, you keep my commandments. He says, be ye holy, for I'm holy. Why do you call me Lord and not do what I command you to do? So it's not enough to just say, Jesus, come into my heart. Matthew 7:21 says, not everyone that cries, Lord, Lord, enter into the kingdom of heaven, but those that doeth the will of my Father. We've got to receive Jesus, but then we've got to walk it out also. All right? How do we receive Jesus? Very simple. It's simple and it's easy. It's painless. It doesn't cost a thing to receive Jesus. The hard part comes after the prayer. So let's do the easy part. Yeah, you may have prayed it. Let's pray it again. Let's pray it all together. Dear Heavenly Father, I admit I'm a sinner, and I confess with my mouth, and I believe in my heart that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, died on the cross, arose 3 days later, sits at the right hand of the Father. I received His blood to wash my sins away, to write my name in the book of life, to keep me holy, and to save me in the day of trouble. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, now that's only the first step. All you've done now is get your sins washed away. Now you have to walk it out. You have to walk out what Jesus has commanded us to walk out. We have to live that Christ-like life. Now, what do we mean Christ-like? Well, it means that we need to get involved in churches. We need to let our brothers and sisters and our pastors speak into our lives to make changes into our lives to help us to become more Christ-like. And it's as simple as that. And I encourage you to get involved in a church. I encourage you to read and study your Bible. And I encourage you to find a Mark 6 and 17 Bible-believing church.